It is. We think it's just 10 o'clock. There seems to be a little bit of variation at this end. This is the Planning Committee for Friday the 8th of December. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Hanley, Councillor Huddleston, Councillor Hart, Councillor Potter and Lydia Slack. I'd also like, whilst we're here, to welcome Chris, who's coming here as an observer, although I think technically you can take part in the last two items on the agenda. And Adam, where is he gone? There he is. Our new, I don't know what the title is. Development and Enforcement Manager, who we will be seeing a lot of over the next few years, probably, won't it? Yes, absolutely. Right, would you like to do the roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Members, please confirm your attendance and any declarations of interest. Councillor Brady.
I'm obviously here and I declare an interest in item 5 to the extent that I'm a member of Taddington Parish Council, which covers the area of the application. But when it came to the Parish Council meeting, I did not vote on it and I've kept an open mind on it.
Councillor Beer.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Buckler.
Present and no interests.
Councillor Chaplin.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Hartshorn.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Councillor Murphy.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor O'Leary.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Priestley.
Present and no declarations.
Councillor Richardson.
Present and no declarations.
And Mr. Smith.
Present and no declarations of interest.
Thank you.
Do you know, I think that's something of a record. I don't think I can ever remember a planning committee where most members haven't received a representation on about something, which is actually quite a record, I think, as far as it goes. Right, the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 30th of November. They've been obviously circulated. 3rd of November, I beg your pardon. They've obviously been circulated. I've had a look through them. I'm happy to move them as a correct record. That is seconded. Does anybody have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? In that case, all those in favour of adopting the minutes? Anyone against? That is carried. Urgent business. Brian, you'd like to make a report to us.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just mentioned that the long-standing enforcement issues at Home Farm in Sheldon have been raised at the High Court in Birmingham this week. The authority had applied for a High Court injunction to seek compliance with the existing enforcement notices and to draw in further unauthorised works that have been taking place over the last few years. The judge has upheld our application, which now prevents further development and provides a strong legal basis to achieve the compliance going forward. The authority has also been awarded legal costs as a result of that and very much defended our case. I just want to give thanks to Andrew Cook, our Principal Enforcement Planner, who represented the authority at the court, and Joanna Bunting, who put the application together for us. Thank you.
Well, that's good news, members, and I think we would want to thank the officers very much for their efforts in that respect. Anybody got any comments on that? No, thank you. Right, we'll now move on to, we'll skip public participation because that arises as we go along. Agenda item 5, the barn at Broadway Lane, Priestcliffe, Taddington. Mark, you're going to introduce this, are you? Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Before I start, there are some corrections to the report that I need to point out. There's reference within the report to a stable building in the title, paragraph 12, and in the title that precedes paragraph 81. The stables were removed during one of the later stages of the application, and so these references just remain there in error. There's no stable now proposed. But the application does seek planning permission to convert a barn to a single 3-bed open market dwelling with an annex at the western end which would provide either ancillary accommodation to the dwelling or be used as a holiday let unit. So, as you can see on the screen here, this is the application site area. It's a field barn situated in an isolated location in open countryside, approximately 0.7 kilometres to the southwest of Priestcliffe. The immediate landscape setting, as you'll see in the photographs, is open pastoral land with medium-scaled fields and fossilised field strips to the south. In terms of its more precise position, the barn here is located at the junction of Bultor Lane, which is the lane you can see running here, which is a non-classified but unsurfaced road, and Broadway Lane, which is a public footpath which runs up the west of the site, as you can see it there. And this is a graphic provided by the applicant, which shows a closer-up building of image rather of the building in its setting. That's actually showing as proposed. And there's a closer-up block plan. So this is looking north towards the building along Bultor Lane, and you can see the building, of course, in the photograph there, within the landscape. As you can see, it is a relatively isolated structure. There is some scattered tree cover. A slightly closer view from the same direction. And then this is from the southeast, so if you'd pass the barn and you were continuing along Bultor Lane looking back towards the building, that is its principal elevation and its east gable that you can see there. And then this is from the southwest, so if you continued up the footpath to the west of the building instead, just before you passed it going north, that is the view you've got of the site. And this is looking back the other way, so this is looking back south from the footpath. You can see the rear of the property with a small area of cat slide roof. A slightly closer view from that same footpath. And then photos of the elevation. So the front elevation there, you can see it's a flat-fronted building with limited openings. The rear, equally less openings to this side. And the west gable and the east, which it's not that easy to pick out on the photograph, but there is an existing stone stair going up to this first floor door. And that's looking to the land in front of the building, which would become parking area and domestic land, and the gated access into the property there. Land to the rear of the building. And this is a parcel. The unclassified road comes behind this wall here, and the footpath continues down here, so the building is just out of shot at this corner here. And then just a photo showing the access into the site in front of the building. So these are the existing floor plans, and that's the ground floor. And so obviously principal elevation is at the bottom here, and you can see there's already an amount of subdivision existing inside. As proposed, this part here becomes the main dwelling, with this section here becoming the annex with connecting door. And then first floor, some further subdivision here, and again you can see there's the connecting door serving both sides of the property. Roof plan as existing and as proposed, the only change there being the introduction of some roof lights to the rear slope. And moving on to the elevations, you've got the rear elevation here as proposed. You can see there's a flue pipe proposed to the rear, and the roof lights that I mentioned. And to the front, have the reopening of the windows, and you can see there's one further one introduced above the door there for flick between the two. And the existing gable, and proposed, and the same to the other side. So the barn dates from the 18th or early 19th century, and it was a care house with a loft over. It's constructed of natural limestone under a blue slate roof, and as you saw, there's a gated access onto Bultor Lane to the south. In terms of the application merits, it's received 38 letters of support throughout the course of the application, but there has been objection from the Parish Council on grounds of harm to the barn's character and landscape impacts that would arise from the development. The conversion of the barn, as proposed, complies in principle with adopted housing policies. And in terms of its physical conversion, externally, the proposals work within the building's shell and with its openings for the most part. However, our concerns arise from the domestication that's clearly going to arise from introducing residential use in this location. Garden areas, parking, internal lighting and domestic paraphernalia will all significantly change and harm the building's historic setting as a result of its character, from which it derives both its heritage and its landscape value to a large extent. In views within the landscape, it would harm the rural agricultural character of the area for those same reasons. It would read as an isolated residential property within the landscape, changing the experience of those using the footpath network and detracting from the special qualities of the national park in this location. And for these reasons, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Cool. Now I've got two speakers. I've got Miss Lisa Hensby and Miss Ellie Hensby. Are you in the right order in that? Lisa first? Which one are you? I'm Ellie. You're very welcome to go first if you wish to, yes. I'm the Yes. There's a little button on your machine there. When the light comes on here, you'll be heard. And you have 3 minutes. Which one?
I'm just going to add before I read this, the road at the side of the barn on the west elevation has been referred to as a public footpath. It's also a private road going up to the neighbouring property as well, so it's also for vehicle use. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming today and for allowing me the opportunity to explain why my disused derelict barn should become our family home and how its conversion represents a viable future use to secure the building, resulting in minimal harm to the setting. I bought the barn in June 22 after several failed attempts at getting onto the property ladder. Our beautiful location is highly sought after by purchasers of second homes and holiday-let businesses, making it extremely hard for locals to acquire housing. The barn offers me and my children everything I've ever wanted for them, a beautiful home which we could call our own with a bedroom for each of them. It would enable us to stay close to our beloved family and friends and ensure the girls could remain in their fantastic schools where they thrive. It would make starting my own business, which I plan to do soon, a much easier process as I'm already a well-known and trusted member of the community. It also offers me the opportunity to care for my elderly grandmother, and at times when the annex is vacant, I would be able to share this exquisite piece of history with others by way of a holiday let. I now want to show you all why this barn is the most ideal candidate for conversion. It hasn't been used for agricultural purposes for over 35 years, as it doesn't fit with modern type farming, nor does it meet today's animal welfare standards. It's redundant in the agricultural sector, so has to find a new use in order for it to be preserved, which is imperative given its non-designated heritage asset status. I understand the concerns about domestication, however these would be minimal. It already has an existing water supply and utility lines are available immediately outside thanks to its neighbouring property. It sits immediately on not just one but two roads, meaning conversion would cause minimal disruption, if not any, to the landscape, but also the environment. To confirm, all the dry stone walls in and around the site and the gateway are to be retained. The gravel parking would be next to the road, so it won't seem out of place. I'm happy to meet conditions to remove permitted development rights for alterations, outbuildings, gates, fences, walls, and submit a landscaping scheme. Priestcliffe itself has a number of properties which are not nucleated, the furthest of which is 0.3 miles north of the barn, meaning the barn resides in the middle of two residential properties. The officer report states that the barn occupies a prominent position within its landscape. However, I'd like to respectfully challenge this. The definition of the word prominent is to project from something, and similar adjectives include protruding, elevated and raised. The statement implies that my barn occupies a position higher than that of its surroundings, which is factually untrue. You, in fact, descend down to the barn from every possible route. It sits at 309 metres elevation, and the centre of Priestcliffe itself sits at 327.
Have you one more sentence, and then if you want to give a closing sentence, by all means do so.
Thank you. Careful consideration has been given to the historic character of the barn, and I have respectfully applied for an extremely sympathetic conversion which would see this non-designated heritage asset virtually unchanged from its original form. The archaeologist has commented that the revised scheme works well with external elevations but not with internal features, and if the application were approved we would be more than happy to revisit the internal layout and accommodate and retain the features of significance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done. Right, now we have Miss Lisa Hensby. Okay.
This barn has been professionally assessed.
Could you put on your machine?
Sorry. Start again. This barn has been professionally assessed and confirmed to be a non-designated heritage asset. Funding the restoration of it within its current agricultural restraints would not be financially viable. It is of use in the agricultural sector, which has resulted in it being unutilised for over 35 years. The barn will inevitably perish unless it is allowed a new use, and this application, which complies with policy, would secure its future. The barn is of significance to its surroundings, and the loss of it would see a negative effect. I'm sure we've seen many disused field barns in our area. To confirm this application would see the footprint of the barn unaltered and no new openings would be created in the stonework. Only the original openings would be restored and incorporated. Light pollution can be easily minimised and mitigated. The bins would be stored in a position well hidden and out of view, as would any washing lines. Vehicles would have a regular feature around the barn, so having one there would not be out of place. There is nothing substantial enough to justify a rejection of the application. The repurposing of this disused building into a family home would contribute towards the government's environmental goals and help towards a sustainable world. Not only are we living through an environmental crisis, but also a financial crisis and severe housing shortage. This is resulting in many young families in our vicinity having forced out of their communities, which is only damaging to them, but also to the communities that they leave behind. It is imperative for small communities to retain the young families living within them, especially those with essential occupations such as Ellie's, and need to support skilled workers remaining in our small communities to serve their needs. This application complies with the policy and evidences by the many letters of support that Ellie has received. I would also like to say, in this season of goodwill to all of you, me and Ellie's father have invested much money to help our daughter get onto the housing market. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. What I'm struggling with this report at the moment is to try and understand what the long-term message is that we're trying to give to the applicant. Is the argument that because we might see washing lines and lights and so on, that this barn will never be convertible to a house? Or is the argument that what we have in front of us doesn't adequately address those issues, and therefore in this form the application has to be refused? Which one is it?
I'll answer that. Thank you, Chair. I think the report is quite clear and well written in the way that it explains the issues from our point of view. The barn is a heritage asset, and that is the bar for whether we consider a conversion to a market dwelling is acceptable. But the policies then also require any development for conversion to conserve the landscape. And here we have a barn where a key part of its significance is its contribution to the landscape in which it sits. And the landscape is clearly part of the barn's significance. They go together hand in hand. It's very difficult to separate the two out from each other. We have to assess this application on its merits first and foremost. And our view is that due to the reasons set out, that the conversion will have a harmful impact. Not necessarily from very wide views in the landscape, but as you're travelling through past the barn, it will be clearly a very significant change in character and one which we feel would be harmful. Now, there may be other uses which are less intensive, have less of an impact, which may be more acceptable, but we would have to assess them on their own merits. And today we have to assess this application.
So give us a clue. What would those alternative uses be? I know what you're going to say, but we have to have it in public, I think.
Yeah, I think, well, the alternative storage uses potentially. There could be equestrian uses. There could be potentially lower intensity uses such as a camping barn. Those sorts of uses which could better conserve the barn. There are other potentially funding opportunities as well if the building was to fall into disrepair. So there are lots of different options. So I don't think it's appropriate to go straight towards the most intensive use. The key consideration is the impact of the development first and foremost.
I'm having some difficulty with that. Well, just let's pick those off. I mean, if you have something like a camping barn, for example, all the things that you're concerned about in terms of cars, lights, washing lines, all those sorts of things will still be there. If you put a storage, I mean, I cannot for the life of me think how a building of this quality could be converted to a storage use without considerable harm to its character, actually. But let's assume that it can. All you're going to have there is all the paraphernalia that goes with the storage use. You see, what worries me about this report is that it says early on, I think it's the comments of the Conservation Officer, that this is a barn of regional importance. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I don't have to inquire too deeply because it obviously means it's a very important barn. And if it's a very important barn, it is very important in principle that it is conserved. And if it's going to be conserved, it is likely that there's going to have to be a trade-off between the importance of conserving it and making sure that it is properly conserved, on the one hand, and some issues about, it could be about domestication or whatever else it might be, on the other. And there may have to be some disadvantage in one direction in order to create the advantage in the other direction. Now, I'm not saying that this application is perfect or anything. I can see that there are issues with it, not least over car parking. But if we are simply saying now, this cannot be converted to a house, then we have to be sure in our own minds about what the future holds, it seems to me, if it is as important as the report tells us it is. And I don't think we're addressing that in the report. I don't think we're seeing the future and seeing where it's going. Brian?
I think we've accepted in the report that the policy principle allows for residential conversion. I think what both officers have said is that we've got to look at each case as it's presented to us. In this particular location, we're saying there's a very high landscape sensitivity. So each time you bring a case forward that changes and potentially simplifies that, we have to look at that part of the balance. So I think what you're expressing there is that there is a planning balance to be struck between the benefit of a viable use and the harms presented. And yes, clearly, amended plans could keep being brought forward that reduce and simplify to the point that you've literally just got a barn in its field setting. And that's where we're saying that And we have seen examples of this in other villages and landscapes of camping barns, and we see other national parks where pod-type developments can be placed within the shell of a building in order to make that work. The whole concept, and it's been supported by inspectors as well, is that holiday uses do have less permanent impacts than permanent residential. People come and go to these properties and have less expectation of their ongoing value to them. It's a place to stop and enjoy the landscape. They don't have to develop gardens and other infrastructure around it. So I don't think that point about domestication is how you've put it, Chair, really. I think that we would have a lesser expectation of changes to the curtilage with holiday use, particularly the camping barn use.
But when we've wanted to convert barns, we've found ways of getting around that, haven't we? I mean, we have, for example, at Housley and beyond Longner, approved major barn conversions, and we've applied conditions and so forth to them to address those issues because we saw the importance of the barn.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that, and I think you're right in saying that we have expressed an importance of this barn, and that the plan as well says we want to conserve these buildings. So I think that value part we absolutely agree with. It's just absolutely getting a very simple relationship to the landscape is really key, and that will always bring that planning balance closer.
Yeah, I mean, there are things we can do. We've seen it, for example, at Overhaddon, where you can build higher stone walls to hide cars and things like that. There may be other things. So even in the landscape, we keep talking about the landscape here. Actually, the major landscape is from the front. And if you view this building from the other side, which we couldn't do yesterday, sadly, it's almost invisible in the landscape because it's completely surrounded by trees. That I think doesn't come out in the report at all. There's only one point at which you can really see this building at all, and that's in a very narrow point where the trees have a drive going through them. Yes, I'm really struggling with this. Members, sorry, this is not just between me and officers. It's, Dermot?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a wonderful barn. I understand what the officers are saying about the location. You know, it says here, proposed conversion would harm the special landscape character. Patrick's right. The major view is from the front of the property, and you've got those trees and shrubs in front of it. All right, they're not very green at the moment, but I have it on good authority from the footpath that's in the distance. You know, once you walk along the footpath and you look up, there's only a couple of instances when you can actually see the actual barn. Now, I haven't tested that, but I believe the character who told me that. There's a property that's further up the track. I don't think there's going to be that much traffic going up that track either way for people to be disturbed to see a barn that's been converted and there's people living in it. I'm sure there's an opportunity here to come up with a conversion that would, cover a lot of the issues that the officers have. I'm looking at the support that this conversion has got from the local people. It's quite telling. It's a local individual. There's a need, in my view. You might not agree, Brian, but I'm just looking. It's this could be a great family home, and I'm thinking about the building. How it's the best way to preserve it for the future, to let somebody convert it. Otherwise, it'll just fall into ruin. And going back to what Patrick says, I can't honestly see how it could be used as storage. The access to the actual building is pretty poor, actually. Can't imagine actually how they got the beasts in there at any stage, but I can't see it having any of the practical uses, and economically, has somebody got the money to sort of convert it into something else if they couldn't live there? So I'll listen to what other people have got to say, but I think there's an approval, maybe not today, at some stage for this development with some changes.
Thank you, Dermot.
Thank you.
Other members? Ginny? And Ken Smith after that. Ginny?
Yes, I actually agree with a lot of what Dermot's saying. Having read the report before going on the site visit, I was expecting to see the barn more prominent than it actually is when we actually physically saw it. And I do share officers' concern about domestication, but if we had Councillor Potter here, she'd be reminding us that there are 2,600 barns which we have in the Peak District, and there needs to be a meaningful use for these, for them to be able to be renovated or continue in that format. I am of the mind that I would like to see this approved, but with a lot of changes to the design and a lot of reduction of the domestication and a lot of more consideration of things like solar panels for regeneration. But I do understand the difficulty that we have of having this barn in the situation where it is. So I sympathise with officers' views, but I'm of the mind that we should approve it with a lot of changes.
Right, I've got Ken Smith next.
Thank you, Chair. We always get the difficult ones, and I understand and sympathise with the applicant's perspective and their ambitions for the property. I think, though, that despite what has been said already, that the property that we're considering is in an isolated location, out in effectively the middle of nowhere. I think that is clear for those who weren't on site visit yesterday from the photographs that were used at the beginning of the officer presentation. I think because of that isolation, it inevitably brings us problems as to how we deal with proposals to maintain the future of properties like this. And I think from an external perspective, as I think is echoed in the report, it's a good presentation. It's a good proposal. There's minimal interference, minimal change to the exterior. There will inevitably be significant change to the interior, and I think that's where the regional importance lies, as is indicated in the comments from the authorities' archaeologists. The barn's an unusually unaltered late 18th or early 19th century, though I believe it's actually late 19th century barn. Now, the conversion means that significance will be removed because the boskins, the hay racks and the rest of it will have to go in order for the conversion to take hold. I think that I think as well that we need to consider other elements of the application. I think the curtilage of the property is significantly large, and I think would need, if this was approved, would have to be more constrained in terms of its extent to minimise impact. I think as well that there is minimal representation of how our climate change policy would be reflected in the application. And I think for all those are almost ancillary reasons to my main issue, which is that I think in this location, this kind of conversion for this kind of property is not appropriate. I acknowledge that there are difficulties in identifying alternative uses, but with respect to those who've spoken already, I think that the emphasis on those shouldn't be coming from us necessarily, but should be coming from applicants as to what potential future uses to conserve the future of these properties might be. So at the moment, Chair, that's all I have to say.
Okay, Ken Richardson I've got next.
Did I pick up that the land is in ownership of the family? First question.
As I understand it, the land is in the ownership of one of the speakers.
Yes.
Which was recently acquired in the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's fine.
Part of a farm being split up.
So my comment is that I didn't go on site visit because I got other things on yesterday. It seems fine to me, But from an heritage point of view, I would want the internal structure recording before those items what's in report are lost.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Any other members want to speak? Matt and then Lee.
Yeah, I think the fact that there's as people have said, the fact that there's a property which is further up the hill makes a difference in terms of its isolation. I think it's less isolated than if it was the other way round, I would have more problems with it. I think if we do approve it, I think that as the report says, that people are not overly concerned with the proposals that have been put in place to the changes that have been proposed for the barn. So I'm not actually seeing a significant issue with the proposals that have been done from an aesthetic point of view. I would agree with the conditions about recording the inside of it, and to make sure that there are conditions about the climate change requirements with that policy. But I have less concern about it than I thought I would originally.
Thank you. Mike. Oh, I've got Lee next, then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was quite sympathetic with the design, to be honest. I thought that what was presented was not a huge change to the building with regard to the number of the windows. You know, they were keeping the outlook of the building, from what I saw on the report, quite sympathetic to how it looks now. And I'm quite sure that with conditions we could move this forward, to be honest, to preserve the building. If not, I can't see a use for the building going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Mike Chaplin.
I think, Chair, you've set out the difficulties quite well, and our officers are doing what we expect our officers to do, which is primarily to defend the landscape. These last few years, we've had a developing housing crisis, and it is reflected in towns and villages all across the country. And I have to say, I'm leaning towards conversion for this barn, partly because of its size, that it actually lends itself to being converted into a dwelling for a family, whereas quite a lot of the 2,000 plus barns have smaller dimensions, which make them less suitable. It's also very close to the road. It's not stuck half a mile up a track or half a mile away in a field where there's no track. So from that point of view, it lends itself to sympathetic development. There's been no application. I mean, what I did notice with this application is there's been no request to create additional openings in the barn. So the applicants are accepting that the barn must keep its form as it was when it was built in the late 19th century. So, yeah, I'm putting that out there, and I'm coming around to the way other members are thinking on this.
Okay. I'm just going to ask officers a question. Sensing what some of the members are saying, Ken has drawn out three very important issues. One about what happens to the interior, one about the extent of the curtilage, and one of them about climate change issues. Can those be dealt with by condition? I'm rather doubtful whether they can, whether they need to be in at the start rather than dealt with after the event, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could potentially do those either way, actually. We've obviously got a red line area defining, as some members have identified, fairly large curtilage essentially around the building. Members could give an indication at this stage as to what they would like us to secure there. For instance, as you look at it here, obviously this is a large area which I think I mentioned earlier. There was originally a stable building proposed as part of these proposals at the back here. So at that point, I suspect this area was included predominantly as paddock. This area would have an impact. Obviously this area is also proposed within the land as well. A much smaller curtilage could be restricted and bound more tightly around the building.
I must confess, I would feel more comfortable if that was dealt with as part of the original application.
And would you like to see that come back if that was the case?
Well, if you can agree it with them, I'm not that bothered. If you can't agree it with them, it'll have to come back.
Okay.
But we haven't got a decision yet.
No. So, but you asked me about two other matters as well as to whether they could be dealt with by condition.
Because I think there are issues here that we still haven't got to grips with. But if we can establish a principle, then maybe we can get to grips with them, and we have to decide whether there's a principle or not. I'm sensing that members are sympathetic to this. By a majority. We do need to sort of take seriously some of the issues that have been raised. My suggestion is that this actually be deferred to enable the issues that Ken raised to be taken properly on board. And if the officers can't agree anything, then it comes back to us. That's my suggestion. Would anybody like to... You'd like to propose that? Propose and second it. Does that make sense? Right. Does anybody have any counter proposal on that? In that case, I'm going to put that to the vote, that this be deferred for the reasons that we've been talking about. All those in favour? Those against? And the one abstaining? Good heavens. There we are. You're quite right to raise these issues, Ken. You're quite right. Adam?
So, to be clear, if officers are able to agree a scheme along the lines that members have just described...
Which addresses better some of the issues that you're concerned about.
Are you happy for officers to deal with that under delegated powers?
Yes.
And only bring it back if those issues can't be resolved?
Yeah, if you can't agree it.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Ms Hemsby, do you understand what's happened? Yes. We're going to ask for a further... There are further things that can be done. These sort of sites are very sensitive, and it's not just because of the site itself, but we have to think about other sites and so forth, and there are guiding principles we try and follow, and I don't think this application goes that far yet. I'm sure the officers will help you through the rest of it. Okay, thank you very much. Right, members, can we move on to the next item on the agenda, 5 to 11, 10 to quarter to 11, which is the cafe in Monash. Mr. Driscoll. Who's taking this one?
Denise.
Oh, Denise, right. Okay, Denise.
Thank you. Morning, members. This application is for the Smithy Cafe in Monash. It's right in the centre of the village, in the core of the conservation area, as you can see from this map. The pub here is a listed building. The village cross here is also listed grade 2. Sorry, how do I... Oh, that's it. So it's an incredibly small curtilage. It's literally the building itself, which has been extended to the back, and a very small yard. And here we can see that the cafe makes an important contribution to the character of the conservation area. It's a beautiful little building, one of the oldest in Monash, and it's considered to be a non-designated heritage asset. And that's just a different view of it with the listed pub next to it. The application is for solar panels, and they are to be fitted on the rear roof of the extension, which there's no problem with at all, and on this front roof slope, which, as you can see, is still the original old tiles. This is the flat roof at the rear. As I say, no problem with solar panels on that aspect, particularly as there is this little parapet wall, which from this side would hide them. So this is the arrangement that has been applied for.
Yeah, it's changed.
On the rear there, as I say, no problem, but quite a lot on the front roof slope. And that gives you an indication of the amount of roof slope that would be covered by the solar panels. So in principle, solar panels are absolutely fine, provided they can be accommodated without adverse impact on the value characteristics of the national park. So obviously designated heritage assets, conservation areas, etc. Very, very valued characteristics. And in this case, the ones on the front roof slope are considered to have an adverse impact on the conservation area within which it sits. It's perhaps exacerbated by the building being only a single storey, so the roof is sort of very much in the eye line as you stand on the green there. So I don't know, shall we go back to a photograph showing the setting? There you go. So it's recommended for refusal, unfortunately, purely because of the ones on the front roof slope. We have discussed with the applicant various different ideas, solar tiles to the front perhaps, but they're very expensive and wouldn't make it viable. More solar panels on the rear roof slope, where there wouldn't be the adverse impact. Possibly some even on the little lean-to at the side here, where the impact would be a great deal less. But the application is to be determined on the plans as they were submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Driscoll. Sorry, I can't read it. Driscoll. Sorry. I hear you had difficulty getting through to us, and so you've been added to the list at the last minute. You're very welcome to come and address us now, if you would. And thank you for showing us around yesterday. There's a button on the machine in front of you. And that's right. And you have 3 minutes.
I've lived in Monash all my life, a place I hold dear. I took over the running of our family cafe when my father passed away 17 years ago. Our small cafe employs myself and 6 full-time staff, all of whom are from the village or have ties to the village, having lived there in the recent past. We're a long-established cafe serving locals, visitors, walkers, cyclists, motorbikes, and anyone who happens to be visiting the village. As a business that's been established for 32 years, we've built quite a reputation, not only in the area, but further afield too. We are an institution. As with many small businesses, there are many challenges to stay relevant and indeed to stay in business. We have, over the years, overcome many challenges, foot and mouth, financial crisis, COVID, etc. The most pressing one is the current issue of electricity. This time last year, our electricity contract expired. We were paying 15 pence per kilowatt hour. I was shocked when our monthly direct debit for electricity rose in October 2022 to £315 a month. This was before our contract expired. I didn't know how we would afford it and what changes we were going to have to make to stay viable. Then our contract expired. December 2022 was the first month of our new contract of new prices. Our rates had gone up from 15 pence per kilowatt to 54 pence per kilowatt, meaning our ludicrously unaffordable direct debit of £315 a month was now £1,554 per month for electricity. The start of this, we had a little bit of government support, which capped this between 20 and 30 pence per kilowatt, meaning a slightly more bearable £700 to £800 a month bill. Now we have no support, we're paying the full amount ourselves. Our bills have been as low as £1,200 and a high of £2,000 per month. This is unsustainable. As a small business, we simply cannot afford this. It is crippling us. We've gone from a busy, viable business to a busier, unviable business. We are busier than we ever have been, but we are struggling to survive. We employ local people and support local businesses by using local suppliers. we're in real danger of having to let staff go simply to afford to pay our electricity bills and to consider having to change to cheaper non-local suppliers to make ends meet. More so in the longer term, we may not even survive at all. It really is that much of a demand on resources when the cost of everything else involved in running the business has literally doubled in price. By having solar panels installed with the help of the Green Entrepreneurs Scheme backed by the local authority and the University of Derby, we aim to contribute to our energy needs by producing just under 20% of the electricity we consume. It is vital that the main front roof of the building is fully utilised for harvesting solar energy. The project wouldn't make commercial sense without the main roof being used. The flat roof at the back would help, but alone wouldn't generate sufficient power to be worthwhile due to the location, size and shading, etc. At current levels, this would mean a saving of roughly £300 a month, meaning we could save nearly as much as what our electricity used to cost in total. £3,600 a year is the difference of employing 4 part-time school kids for weekend or summer holiday work or not doing. It's the difference of laying off a full-time member of staff. It's the difference of closing 1 day a week.
Mr Driscoll, you're past your 3 minutes. If you want one last sentence, you're very welcome to give it to us.
The summing up's basically, I have got more to say, but I know I've run out of time. I've got so much to say on it. These facts and figures obviously are all in addition to the green aspect of the proposal, which almost goes without saying. But to quickly touch on it, in my view, we need to address the supply and generation of electricity in this country, whether in a conservation area or not. What are we conserving if the current climate change carries on? There's no point in saving or looking after the aesthetics of these beautiful places if we're to be underwater or burnt out by climate change.
Thank you very much. We did a site visit yesterday. I think there were some members who were anxious to find ways of helping out here, from what I gathered from what we saw on the site. Any members want to make a contribution to this discussion? Ken?
Thank you, Chair. Sometimes we have to compromise what we believe to be our principles, and I find myself erring towards that direction. I can understand why officers have reached the conclusion that they have, and I can see the potential for, well, the reality, if this was approved, of impact on the setting of the adjacent listed buildings and the pub and the village cross. But as we saw yesterday, there are panels on properties further down the road towards Bakewell, and in the distance we could see the applicant's own property with the panels thereon. I think at a very basic level there's an inequality in that the only reason this application has come to us is because it's for a business property, not a domestic one. If it was a domestic one, my understanding is that they could have been attached anyway, and we wouldn't be here discussing this. So I think that in terms of the authorities' need to address our thriving communities and to ensure that they do thrive, and that includes the businesses that occur within them and the people who live there and commute in or out or whatever, who are employed in those businesses, we have sometimes to accept what might otherwise be considered to be unpalatable. And I feel that I lean towards the support of the proposed work rather than the application at this stage, but I'm quite happy to listen to what other members have to say.
Can I just, before any other member comes in, can I just ask this? Is recognising that tiles are too expensive, not practical, is this particular sort of panel the best that can be achieved in this circumstance?
We have requested that they're full black, non-reflective panels. The only way of further mitigating it would be if it was actually integrated into the roof, which would obviously be sort of very expensive, and it would impact on the roof covering, which, as we said, is the traditional roof covering.
Thank you. Mike, I got you next. Mr. Chaplin, you're next.
Sorry, I was getting some well-timed advice before I put my foot in it. So, if I understand you, right in what you're saying, that Mr. Driscoll's got the right tile. Sorry, he's gone for the right finish on the tiles, but not in the format or the layout that you think would be best. Because there's no getting away from the fact that the south-facing roof is the one that's going to deliver the energy, the cost savings from this.
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of calculations. I know more about solar panels than I ever used to. The solar panels on the flat roof at the rear, which, as I say, there's no problem with, would generate 306 kilowatts, is it? And the ones on the front would be 396. So it is a substantial, sort of lesser benefit from the ones on the rear. But even with the non-reflective ones and full black, there would still be an impact on the, as I say, non-designated heritage asset.
Yeah.
I think since Sheffield City Council declared a climate emergency, and I believe many other local authorities that have land in the Peak District National Park also have. And given that the government has conceded that we have to move in the direction that mitigates climate change, that they've allowed for permitted development on domestic properties, I think we're in a no-win situation. We're effectively swimming against the tide on this if we try and prevent it. But if we can come up with a format that maximises the I'm fully in support of having non-reflective tiles on that south-facing roof, and it's something we're going to have to get used to in the Peak District National Park as we are everywhere else in the country. It's going to be the layout where I suppose there may be some room for negotiation.
Okay, well, let's come back to that.
With
I've got a queue of officers all wanting to speak, so let's start with Brian.
Okay. Yeah, I just be absolutely clear. This isn't about saying we're against solar panels in conservation areas. That absolutely isn't the case. We have guidance. We have a very good supplementary planning guidance document that shows how we think we can integrate a range of technologies across the national park in landscape settings, on farms, and in places like this. And it's really, as you say, about placement, because there's also law around protecting our heritage and character. What we don't want to see is cumulative, at some point in time, that there is no reference to the character, the materials, the form of our core historic environment. So I think some compromise on that and balance in that is reasonable when we've got two areas of legislation trying to do two different things. We absolutely acknowledge the climate crisis, and the work that Denise has been doing is to try and find solutions within that. The guidance that we've got actually shows a typical village scene, very much like this, and it will show prominent roofs, front roofs, which we're trying to protect as much as possible, but also then finding these subsidiary roofs and other technologies, air source, ground source, and ground-mounted type solutions that can also contribute. I think, we've said I think the slide where we show the layout with the front and the rear, the flat roof, that one. So you can see what we've got here. Find most of the problem here, because if that was to happen to all of the roof slopes in the middle of Monash, we'd very much lose a sense of the character and grain and materials in the village. So, there are other solutions there, either the embedded ones, or sometimes you can see a run of panels at one level that actually retain some sense of the character as well. There is scope here as well on the side. So we think there's a mix of opportunities there that could present a balance rather than completely losing the sense of character to the front. So that's the position we're presenting, that we think there are solutions there that create more of a balance, because we have to think where this goes over 20, 30, 40 years' time. And we're already seeing several of the properties within that street scene that have got these. Where does it go? So it's just the question we're raising there.
Adam, do you still want to speak?
Yeah, just very briefly, I agree with what Brian's just said, just a matter on decision making really. It was mentioned about the inequality of it not being permitted development, but legally speaking, it does need planning permission, so it's just important to stress to members that we shouldn't give that too much weight. We should be making a decision in accordance with the plan, as law requires, taking into account other material considerations. And our policies do allow renewable development technology like this in principle in conservation areas. And the two key issues here, which have been alluded to in the debate, is one is what is the impact of the solar panels, first and foremost. And if members consider that the impact of the solar panels is acceptable and not harmful, then the application could be approved with no further thought needed. But there is also, on the other hand, the provision in the MPPF to consider where there is less than substantial harm, which could be the case here if members consider that to be the case, to take into account public benefits. And there are public benefits which have been mentioned, mainly the generation of renewable electricity and mitigating the impacts of climate change, but also the benefits to a local service in terms of its viability and its continued operation. So it's just important that members think about those two issues when they're making their decision and consider them and apply them in accordance with the policy.
Right. Mike, but you come back again. And then if one or two other members may want to speak. I've got Ginny and then Dermot.
Going back to Brian's point that you can have streets and you can put the solar panels on the side of the roofs that are away from the street so that you don't get to see them in the street scene. That's fine for people who've got, or homes that have got south-facing roofs on the back, but not so good for those people who've got north-facing roofs on the front. And given the space that this place occupies, I can't see where they would put ground source heat pumps. They can't. It's not going to be an option.
Sorry. That is something that has been discussed, and I went and met Mr Driscoll at the site. We looked at the courtyard. It's very, very tiny. We thought maybe an air source heat pump, but actually that little courtyard is so tiny. There's a shed and 2 gas bottles. There's really no room for anything within there. We even went down the route of could solar panels be put on the shed roof as well, but that's not viable because it's a timber shed.
Okay, I've got Ginny. And then Matt will come next door, but one to that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's obviously been a lot of work done by our officer, Denise, looking into this with the applicant to come up with the best option. For the viability of the business, for climate reasons, climate control reasons, I think, and also the fact that there are already solar panels on the main road leading down to Bakewell, I would be in supportive of this. I just wonder, and you've obviously done a lot of work on this, whether there is a better arrangement of the panels on the roof to make it less, or whether there could be a better arrangement to make less impact.
Well, I think that was
what Brian
Brian's
was,
point,
yes,
which we'll
yes.
come back to if we can.
Yes.
But so let's get the contributions. Dermot, I've got next.
Thanks, Chair. We got dropped off outside the smithy yesterday, and I thought, oh gosh, Monash, you know, sure we can't have solar panels. It'll affect the sort of the look of the village and whatever. And as I walked further back, across the green, and looked down the road, and I saw the other panels on other roofs and whatever, and I thought, oh right, okay. I've driven past those properties hundreds of times, and I've never really noticed them. I'm not saying it's going to be exactly the same with the smithy because it's a lower elevation. That's why it's so important to go on these visits. If you were just reading the report, for me anyway, I might have been 100% swayed to go with what the officers were recommending. But actually, after visiting the village, listening to Mr Driscoll, whatever, this is a difficult one. I'm concerned about the viability of the business, whatever, what it contributes to that area. I'm of a mind to support actually allowing these panels to be installed. I personally can't think how we could configure them in another way that would make them less distinctive, because ultimately it needs as much capacity to collect, potential power. So I'm of a mind to support approving this application.
Okay, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, I'm not particularly going to talk about renewable energy generation because I am supportive of it generally. It was the point that I wanted to make was about the existing covering, and the company's been having lots of conversations about whether you can use tiles or different embedding it in. We have solar panels on our house, and the roof is completely untouched. The implication, and so I think we need to think very carefully, not necessarily about this application, but in future about making sure that you can keep the structure of the roof. The panels just sit on the top of it, and so I would think about. I think we need to be really careful about saying, in order to look right, we've got to, we should be embedding stuff into or replacing the tiles, when actually sitting it on the top means that you keep the structure of the building as it is, and it makes very little difference to it. Does that make sense?
I understand the point you're making, yes. Can I ask this? Picking up Ginny Bryan's point, is there realistically another configuration of these panels that will have the same impact?
I think the applicant said when he spoke that he needs the coverage that he's proposing on the main roof for the scheme to be viable. So if you're going to cover that amount of the roof with those types of panels, then I think that is the best way of doing it. You have got them in portrait and they're in a symmetrical shape.
Okay.
So I don't think there would be a better way of doing that, no.
Well, that's the answer, Ginny. Okay. Right, members? Is somebody you're going to propose it, Dermot? Yes. Okay. You're going to second it. Any amendments? Those in favour of approving it as it stands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's no one against. That's unanimous. Mr. Driscoll, you have your panels. Okay. Right. It's 11:50. Well, 10 past 11. I'm going to guess this next one's going to take about 20 minutes or so. Do members want a break, or are they happy to continue? Okay, we'll continue. Good. What?
Dermot wanted a break. Dermot wanted a break.
Oh, you want to? Well, okay. Well, I mean, I don't mind. 11:15. Okay. Chapel House one, okay. Are we starting? Yes, we might, well, it's 1:15. We on? Right, members. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 7, which is the Chapel House, Warslow. Denise, you're dealing with this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
We're starting, please.
Sorry, Mike, have you got...
Yes.
I beg your pardon?
The lands that the applicant is wanting for this next item, is that within the Peak District National Park?
Yes.
So we ought to share interest there.
Oh, is it owned by the National Park Authority, do you mean? Is it owned by the National Park Authority?
Yes, that's
one
of the reasons.
Well, we should just record that this is a National Park owned site, although we are not the applicant, as I understand it. Okay, that's fine. Well done, well spotted. Would you like to start, please?
Okay, this one, actually it's another heritage issue. This is Chapel House in Warslow. It's on the Leek Road beyond the Greyhound pub as you're going out of the village. So still technically in the village in the 30 zone, but actually it's where people start zooming up and down. And where's the thing now? The chapel stands almost directly on the road. It's got a very, very small forecourt to the front with railings, but that contributes to the setting of the chapel. It's been converted to a dwelling, and as part of that conversion, this area here was granted as amenity space. The application is to create some further amenity space at this side. So that's going to be a proposed garden. As I say, the area that is amenity space is mostly laid to parking because, although technically in the 30 zone, it is a faster area of road because it's going out of the village. People tend to ignore the speed limit. So it's very important that the applicants can turn as well as park in there so that they exit in a forward gear for safety. So, as it originally came in, we had a patio area, we had a garden shed, a stone wall around, and the removal of this diagonal wall. We have had amended plans which have mitigated the scheme to quite a large extent. The garden shed has been moved to the existing domestic area. The patio area has been removed. And then yesterday, we had another amended plan, which I managed to get onto the presentation, and that is the offer to rebuild this diagonal wall. So this is the chapel as you see it in the street scene. As I say, the only curtilage it had originally was this little area of forecourt here, which is protected by the railings. Otherwise, it was built straight into the fields and was surrounded by agricultural land on all sides. You can see there's a wall across there, which is the contentious issue that hasn't been got round as yet. There was a wall at this side, but that's been breached, obviously, when the conversion was granted to allow access to the parking area. Going the wrong way. So this is the area that is already domestic curtilage. As you can see, it's mostly laid to parking. There is a little bit of garden round, but certainly nothing to sit in and have a drink of coffee or whatever. And this is the other side of the chapel. As you can see, as I say, it goes straight onto agricultural land here, straight onto agricultural land here. It has been noted that until quite recently there were cattle pens in this area. Nonetheless, it's still agricultural land. And this picture shows the line of that diagonal wall. Now actually, most of that wall has gone, as you can see in some photos that are coming up. So, as you can see, it's gone. But the applicant, as I say, has offered to rebuild that wall. That wall actually isn't the applicant's responsibility, I just want to add. So, but the offer is there, which is a really good mitigating measure. And it would be rebuilt as fairly traditional. The coping stones maybe ought to be altered so that they're more rustic. The shed is an absolutely standard shed, modest size. As I say, that has been moved onto the west side where it is domestic curtilage already. So if we go back to that view of it, with that but the diagonal wall rebuilt, it would to some extent hide the making of the curtilage. However, the authority maintains that it should remain as agricultural land as far around the area as possible, and what we have suggested as an alternative is to extend the area that has already been domesticated to provide a sort of triangular strip of garden in that area, and that would leave this side and this side straight onto the agricultural land. So the recommendation is of refusal because of, as I say, most things have been mitigated, but because this wall here is to be removed to provide access, and that's a really important contribution to the setting of the chapel, as you can see here, and that was the historic curtilage. Thank you.
You have to forgive me, I'm having some difficulty understanding the photographs. Which is the wall that we mustn't get rid of? Where can we see that?
Oh, sorry, I think I'm going the wrong way. So it's
I
this
understand
wall
its location.
here.
I'm trying to see what it looks like. No, that's a different wall.
This is the front wall. This is the back wall.
If I go back to
No,
one
I
of the
think what's this-
photographs,
Yeah.
that photograph, so you've got an area here that's walled, and then you've got a diagonal line across here,
Yes.
which, as I say, the wall, it looks like it should be wall all the way along. It actually isn't. It's ramshackle fence for a fair deal of it now. The other bit of wall.
Oh gosh.
That
Does everybody understand that? I don't. No, I'm sorry. I'm not understanding this at all.
this wall here.
Right. So,
that defined the original curtilage of the chapel.
let me see if I can find that photograph. I can't see it. The only wall.
There. So it's
Oh, I
just
see.
behind there.
That's coming off the side of the chapel, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Gosh. Right. Look, fine. We'll try and come back to that. I've got one. Have you finished your presentation?
Yes. Thank you.
I have one speaker, Teresa Critchlow.
Good morning. The applicant purchased the building in 1998, and since purchasing and converting the property, they have grown from a family of 2 to a family of 4, having been blessed with 2 children who are now 8 and 4. The land to the west of the building is not owned, but leased from the National Park Authority. Whilst the existing curtilage may at first glance appear quite sizable, it really only provides off-road parking and turning with a narrow raised planted bed. The layout of this area was agreed as part of the licence and must be retained as such. The area does not provide any private amenity space, nor is there any external area where the children can play. Despite a 30-mile-per-hour speed restriction, it's rarely adhered to, and planning conditions prevent gating the access, meaning it's therefore unsafe for the children to play outside. This has been a concern for several years, and extensive discussions with the authority, they have now offered to sell the additional land to the applicant to provide the property with a private garden area. This has been accepted by the Secretary of State and endorsed by members of this authority at both their Internal Resource Management and Performance and Resource Committees this year. This process has been a long and tortuous process which has taken 5 years. It's therefore somewhat disappointing that we are here today at the very final stage with a recommendation for refusal. The Conservation Officer has identified 3 concerns. The first relates to the loss of the enclosed forecourt. The forecourt of the chapel has not been enclosed since the other return wall was removed as part of the building's conversion 25 years ago. This small wall needs to go to give access to the new curtilage. It's less than 2 foot wide. The second relates to the loss of the important historic dry stone wall. This wall, which is not owned by the applicant, has fallen down and the majority no longer exists. Amended plans have been submitted which would secure reinstatement of the wall if permission is given today. The third reason relates to the enclosure of the agricultural land. The application area is modest in size and does not extend beyond the rear building line of the building. It was until very recently enclosed by a cattle pen comprising of timber telegraph poles, post and rail fencing and horizontally laid tin roof sheets. The boundary of the curtilage would be on the same line as the former cattle pen and would be delineated with a dry stone wall. Whilst I accept that this building is being converted and the future of the building safeguarded, the issues re demystification which related to the previous barn conversion application today are also just as relevant to this application. The applicant fails to see how the use of the land as a garden would be any more harmful than its previous enclosure and use for animals. The garden shed has been relocated on the other side of the building and the patio area removed. The difference in ground levels from the street scene and existing planting between, which would be retained, means that any public views of the new garden would be extremely limited. No objections have been received from any neighbours and the parish council fully support the proposal. Just to sum up, COVID and the requirement to isolate has had a significant and detrimental impact on the applicant and his family's health and well-being, which was exacerbated massively by the lack of any outside space. The applicant is thankful that they live in such a beautiful part of the world and would really like to be given the opportunity to enjoy it from their own home. Thank you.
Right. I'm struggling to understand what the real issue is here. There is a short length of wall between the Leek Road and the corner of the chapel. It's the disappearance of that that's the problem. Yes. So there's no problem in principle with converting that patch of land to a garden.
Well, there will be an impact on the setting of the listed. Sorry, there would be an impact on the setting of the listed building, because, as I say, historically it was built only with that small forecourt and just straight into the field, so with agricultural land running up to it and in all directions. It's already had domestic curtilage to one side, so it's felt that to create domestic curtilage to the other side would have an impact on the significance of the building.
Really? Okay, members? Ken?
Just as for clarification, Chair, the triangle of land that is being offered by the authority as a substitute for what's being requested, what are the equivalent areas? Is it the same area that's being offered against what is being sought, or is it a different size?
It was more, the suggestion was more the location of the curtilage, of approximately the same size, but in order to mitigate its appearance, we thought a chamfered wall rather than a square stuck on the back of the existing domestic curtilage would have less impact.
And can I ask, Chair, have we had a response from the applicant against that offer?
They would like the application determined as is, but with the amendments that have mitigated the impact, as I say.
Well, if you're going to do that, I wonder whether you'd come to the chair and put the thing on so that...
Can I just clarify that this area was proposed to us by the National Park Authority, by Chris Mumby. It was the National Park Authority's idea that this was the area of land that was given over to domestic curtilage. It was on that basis that this parcel of land was referred to the Secretary of State and has gone through 2 internal management committees here at Peak Park Authority. The area of land that Denise is proposing as an alternative has not gone through any such consultation process, and it's unlikely that Chris Manby will take that area forward. So whilst that additional area, the extension of the existing curtilage, is preferable to the planning department, it's not preferable to the Secretary of State or the Estates Department of the Peak Park.
I understand the point you're making, but we must consider this on the planning merits rather than on the history of land ownership, I think. What I'm struggling with a little bit is where all of this is going to be seen from. Looking at, I think it's the picture before that. That's the one. This wall here is a high wall which would hide most of the garden, it looks to me, particularly if that wall is going to be rebuilt. You've then got this curious piece of land in front of it, which is filled with shrubbery. I don't know what that is, whether it's highway or whether it's part of the curtilage or not. But it is part of the curtilage. But I'm wondering where all this is going to be seen from, and whether actually the alternative wouldn't be just as visible.
As I say, the offer to rebuild the rear wall, if you like, the higher wall there that you can see, only came in very recently, so I haven't had time to discuss it with our conservation officers. But yes, I think if that wall is returned, it would go a long way to hiding any such area.
I've got... It's the sort of thing that's going to keep us going all morning. I've got Mike Chaplin first, then Ken Richardson.
Chair, I'm seriously concerned that it's come here, given what has gone before.
I would like to avoid site visit, but I can see it coming up if we're not careful.
But it does occur to me that rather than rebuild the wall behind, why the forward wall could not be raised higher so that it is level with that bit of the wall that is visible from the roadside.
Our built environment team, both archaeology and conservation officers, have said that the diagonal line is the historic line. Right. So the rear wall that you can see in that photo.
I suspect that the other wall has probably been built onto the highway, and probably still is highway. Ken Richardson.
Well, Chair, I was just going to
say... Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Mike. I do apologise.
I feel that some coordination from a very senior level might have saved us having to bring this to the planning committee in the way that it has done, Chair.
Okay. Ken Richardson.
Yeah, I'm disappointed that information came late. Perhaps this should have gone back for discussion. But now it's here. I would move acceptance of this application.
As with the latest amendment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's... Any other members? Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second it.
We've got a seconder on that. Has anybody else got any thoughts or comments on it? In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour of approving this on the terms set out by Ken? All those in favour? Anyone against? That is carried. That's okay? Thank you. Right. We've got the...
Sorry, you should take a vote on the listed building.
Yes, I've just realised I did make a note of the listed building. You have the two reports. They both cover exactly the same thing. The first one is a planning report, which we've just approved. The second one is for the listed building approval. Ken, I presume you're proposing that again. And that's being seconded again. Yes, by Lee. All those in favour of the listed building consent? Anyone against? No, that's all approved. Sorry, thank you very much indeed. Right, agenda item 9. This was one we did a site visit to in the middle of the summer on a nice, warm, sunny day, unlike yesterday. And it's agenda item 9 and 10, which is the listed building consent application. And Adam, you're dealing with this, are you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Oh, we need to go on to the other file.
Is the second presentation uploaded to this one?
I was told it was. Yeah, Karen said she put both on the desktop.
It's certainly on this one. We could swap the...
Do you want to give it to Adam? Is that his problem? You have it. Okay, I can look round.
Yeah, we switch the... Is that a problem?
Mine's now gone off.
It's definitely not on there. It's the memory stick.
It's not on desktop. We've only got 5 We take a 5-minute pause and just...
We need what's called an IT break. let's get started.
Are we connected?
Good. Just to resume, we are now IT connected apparently, and this is the application for 6 dwellings at Greencroft Farm, Middleton by Yulegrave. Adam Maxwell is going to introduce it for us.
Thank you, Chair. This 2 applications, so planning permission and listed building consent for the conversion of agricultural buildings to 6 dwellings and obviously the associated works. Greencroft Farm is a Grade 2 listed building, and that's this property here, which is actually outside the application site, but is attached to some of the barns that are within the application site. So the barns are either listed by being attached to the farmhouse or are curtilage listed, and located in the heart of Middleton and within the conservation area between Rake Lane and Weddow Lane, which are these 2 which straddle on either side. So the proposal is, as I say, to convert the buildings to 6 units, and that plan sort of gives a good overview of what's proposed. This application has been amended, and because there were previous concerns about elements of the conversion and proposed garage and its potential impact on archaeology, which was up here in the northern part of the site. We've had amended plans since, which have overcome those issues. The farmhouse and shippen is here, so this is the farmhouse and this is the shippen, and that would be converted to a dwelling. And this sort of L-shaped range here, which is a mainly single storey with some 2-storey elements, would be converted to 4 dwellings. And then this detached building here, which is a former cart shed granary, would be converted to 1 dwelling. To the east side of the buildings is a yard, which would remain hard surfaced with little subdivision. Dwelling number 5, which is the cart shed, would have a curtilage either side, and there would be a new track from an existing access off Rake Lane, which would provide access down to the farmhouse and the rest of the units, with also a second access from Weddow Lane to one of the units. Landscaping is proposed to create gardens to the rear, which would be subdivided, as you can see on the plans, and parking would be laid out accordingly. So just go through some of the pictures. You can see the buildings are clearly of historic interest and architectural interest because of their age, their character, their contribution to the conservation area. That's the cart shed. And that's the rear of the range. As you can see, there are some works that have been carried out on site, and there's some excavation to the rear of some of the buildings which has been carried out. That is proposed to be restored as part of this application, with just an access around the back, a narrow strip around the back for access. So all that is going to be restored in the landscaping details. Some more details of and that you can see the back of the range again. Some repair works going on to the range, and that's so we can see there. That's the listed building, and that's the range of L-shaped buildings, sort of viewed from the northwest. And that's within the yard, and there you can see the neighbouring church. This is where you go into Middleton Hall here. That's within the building. You can see some of the historic trusses. You can see some of the buildings have been altered. You see some block work has been put in. Not quite as intact as the field barn we saw earlier. And again, that's looking at the L-shaped range over the yard. And again, back the other way at the other side of that range. And again, that's looking from the road. We can see there's a cart shed element, which we'll see in a minute, has got a more contemporary approach to the design. And that is an image of the site before the modern buildings that were in the yard were demolished. So they've gone now, those modern buildings, when the historic buildings are sort of hidden behind them. So this is part of the proposal. As you can see, this is conversion of the L-shaped range. This is units 1 to 4. Which would be to 4 dwellings, which would have accommodation on ground floor and accommodation at first floor. There are alterations to the roof structure to accommodate that. Some of the trusses are being moved so that access can be provided up into the roof space. And there are some concerns about that from our conservation officer, which I'll come to in a bit. But generally speaking, the conversion is within the shell of the existing buildings, with repairs and new door and window openings within the existing openings. There were originally a significant number of roof lights on more prominent roof slopes, but these have been reduced to the minimum reasonably necessary and have been sited low down on the roof above the openings below, which is in accordance with our design guidance. And this is the sort of more modern cart element, which has got the sort of contemporary approach, which looks quite well on the building. And again, you can just go through different elevations to see reusing existing openings with recessed elements. And again, some roof lights on the rear roof slope there. And that's the cart shed plus granary, which would be a 2-bedroom dwelling. And again, reusing its opening, the opening on the right being reopened, which we might remember from the earlier photograph has been blocked up with brick. So in principle, these buildings clearly are heritage assets in their own right, but also make a contribution to the conservation area. So our policies allow for their conversion in principle to market dwellings as proposed. A development appraisal has been submitted with the application because as the proposal is for more than one dwelling, our policy requires us to consider whether we could deliver affordable housing as part of the scheme. That development appraisal has been assessed by the case officer, and it's accepted that due to the significant costs of developing the site, that it wouldn't be viable to provide affordable housing, unfortunately, on this site. So the key issue is the impact of the development upon the heritage assets. And there are, as I said, some concerns in regard to specific elements about alterations to some parts of the roof structure and some floors, but overall, in consultation with our conservation officer and archaeologist, we're satisfied that overall the scheme provides a conservation-led approach which is appropriate and justifies market housing. So the application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Right. We have one speaker who I think is going to be read for us by Dem Services.
So this is on behalf of the applicant, Guy Brammer. This is an important farmstead and a designated heritage asset in the heart of the settlement. It has been badly neglected for many years and has suffered from multiple inappropriate and harmful alterations and additions, detracting from its value and significance. This site will never be a working farm again, and so the buildings need to find a new use compatible with their location surrounded by existing residential properties. This scheme will guarantee its careful reinstatement and its survival in an optimum viable use. The enhancement on offer is considerable. The proposals have been drawn up in close consultation with the authority at every stage. Whilst changes in authority personnel have made this challenging at times, for example, it was a previous conservation officer who suggested a garage block to provide on-site but screen car parking, the applicant has strived to strike the necessary balance between managing impact on the asset and securing permission for a scheme that is viable. As I am sure committee are aware, Historic England advised that the best way to conserve a building is to keep it in use or to find it an appropriate new use if it has passed out of use. An unreasonable, inflexible approach will prevent action that could give a building new life. Indeed, it can eliminate that use. A reasonable and proportionate approach to owners' needs is therefore essential. It is vital that, in order to conserve and enhance the asset, a viable and carefully considered scheme needs to come forward quickly to prevent further deterioration. The appropriate balance has been struck in this application between necessary change and the long-term survival of a range of buildings that has no current function, agricultural or otherwise. Whilst there will be some minor impact, as with all conversion schemes, the bigger picture is one of enhancement and continued long-term maintenance. The applicant is willing to make a detailed record of the buildings prior to conversion as required by the proposed condition and this will include the remnants of agricultural features that currently exist but that are not capable of accommodating a residential use. The Parish Council sees the benefit these proposals will bring to the village and support the principle of reuse. I hope committee will similarly see the opportunity that exists here to benefit both the site itself and also the character and appearance of the conservation area. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. Right, members, don't forget we've got two reports. One of them is the planning application report, and it's followed by the listed building report. As I said earlier on, we went on the site visit, and I think we were all, those of us who were on the site visit, were quite impressed by the buildings and so forth that we saw. Members, any thoughts? Ken Richardson.
Yeah, EV points. Will they be put in the buildings?
I don't think...
I've got a couple of questions. But
Yeah, I don't think electric vehicle charging points are proposed. That is something, if members consider necessary, that we could potentially condition. There are air source heat pumps proposed.
yeah, but it's for open market sales, aren't they? So what market is it looking at? Is it looking at retired people, younger people? Because if it's younger people, will there be any strain on the educational provision within the area?
Well, the proposal is for market housing, so it's not from a planning point of view, anyone could purchase it and occupy it.
Yeah.
It's not intended to be local need affordable or elderly people accommodation. So, yes, you're right. The occupants of these dwellings may well have families, which could put pressure on the education system.
So, from my experience, we're talking about a lot more houses, but we always have a 106 agreement to provide for that facility, and also 6 properties. You could probably squeeze some money out of them for any public open space developments in the village, because it does mention the gifting of some land for the maintenance of the toilet facilities. It could go towards paying for that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And having recently acquired some experience from Derbyshire Dales, which this is the district for, their policy wouldn't require contributions for education or play areas for schemes of this scale. So, and our policies would not either. So I don't think there's any policy requirement to ask for that. In this case, yes, you are right in terms of the strip. There's the part of the proposal is the strip of land to be given to just allow better access around the public toilets up there.
I think, Ken, that sort of contribution is something which must arise out of the local plan review that we're doing. I think we can't sort of bounce it in now. We've not done it for other developments. And I think we've got to keep on the pair of railway lines we're on at the moment. We may well put some extra points in.
But we don't usually talk about 6 houses.
Yeah, and there could well be an issue, but these things go up and down, don't they, in every community. But your point is a good one for the future. It's a good one for the future. Other members? Ken?
Thank you, Chair. I think on balance, I welcome what is being proposed on the basis that it is a conservation-led approach. I think these are important buildings. They're in a pretty parlous state, and I think that what is the proposal is appropriate to consider them for the future. I have a couple of queries, Chair. One is the extent to which this is a retrospective application, insofar as when we visited in the summer, it was quite clear that a significant amount of works had already been undertaken. Buildings have been stripped of their wall coverings, joists, floors have been taken out. We are proposing in the recommendations that there should be a detailed programme of historic building recording and an archaeological watching brief. Yet a good deal of the issues that those recommendations would have addressed have already been done. In addition, that's one query. The second query is the listed farmhouse, which appears to be outside the boundary of this application. Yet again, when we visited, that building had been gutted. The interior walls had been stripped of their plasterwork and the rest, down to stone. The first floors had been taken out. All that remained was a wooden staircase in one room. But it's not forming part of this application. So where are we with that, for starters?
Brian might know more about the history than I do, having only started on Monday. But my understanding is the listed building itself has had a separate application for listed building consent for works. In terms of the ongoing works to the buildings, yeah, I fully appreciate your concern on that. And my understanding is it's been a very difficult task for officers to sort of negotiate a good scheme while works are being ongoing and while imposing on the applicant to make sure that they don't do anything completely unacceptable. And it's been a very difficult negotiation for officers to get to where we are. But yes, it certainly is true that the part of the works are retrospective, and in terms of recording, it will be off the basis of what we have now, unfortunately. Yeah, but it's a good point.
I suppose my concern, Chair, is that we don't appear to be sanctioning works unauthorised works occurring by approving this. I'd just like to make that clear, that we aren't doing that.
It's a bit of a dilemma, isn't it? Because the other way, it works the other way around. It'll be unauthorised works unless you approve it.
Exactly. We are in what's known as a cleft stick, I believe. But otherwise, Chair, I would support the recommendation.
Are you
in fact,
moving?
I'll move
You're
it.
moving it. Any other members wish to make a comment on this? Mike?
Yes, I would just like to come back to Ken Richardson's point about Section 106 monies. I do think that given the confidence with which the applicant has set about repurposing these farm buildings, and and it is to be commended that existing materials are being used, but these are open market houses, and there is a desperate need for affordable housing all across the Peak District National Park, not just in this village. I do think we should make a claim for Section 106. Could be negotiated that we don't ask for what would be the standard rate for the area. I'm not knowledgeable on that, but I do think that is a reasonable ask, that money can then be set aside for to support affordable housing.
I don't disagree with the sentiment. What I do disagree with is the legal base upon which you can ask for that. We do not have a policy through our local plan system at the moment that would justify us doing that. And it's very clear that Section 106 agreements can't be insisted upon unless they're soundly policy-based or unless there's some other very sound reason for them. And I don't think we could justify that in this particular case. If, you can ask nicely, which is... you can ask nicely, but you do need some sort of base upon which to be able to put it. And there's a process to go through to establish that. Sorry, Ken, do you want to come back?
I just want to come back on that. It's, you've already said that affordable housing isn't applicable on here because of the viability, etc.
Yeah.
So that's the basis you ask, and not very nicely either, because it's started work already.
Well, I think what we were told was that the viability assessment suggested that the affordable housing wasn't affordable on this site, so the contribution instead would be the same problem, wouldn't it?
No, because we have contributions off-site because we've got villages what don't like, you know what I mean? So we get that money off them and improve houses somewhere else.
Sorry, just to come back on that, yeah, there is a policy mechanism for asking for affordable housing and contributions, but that is subject to viability, and that's sort of embedded into the policy. And here, the evidence is that it wouldn't be viable to provide affordable housing or make a contribution. So that's the position that officers have.
I'm sorry to keep labouring point, but who determines it's not valid? Is it the district valuer? Because that's what we use. Because we don't take the word of developers because you know what they're like.
Can you help with that, please?
Yeah, I mean, just on the infrastructure point, the evidence that led to the current core strategy told us that there wasn't the scale of development coming forward in the national park that would place a pressure on school places or highways or whatever. So there was no need for a community infrastructure levy at that point, so it wasn't embedded into policy. What we're looking for is kind of case-by-case contributions to benefiting the national park, which is predominantly a heritage-led plan, and but the only area of community benefit is on affordable housing, and that's the only area where we ask for viability work. There's no, apart from the above one level, there's no other kind of sense in there that of what a threshold of development is that might not be viable. So we have to have these assessments in case by case to do that, and it's the officer judgment on that as a starting point. We have had a few cases, most recently the Marquis of Granby case, which was of a much more significant scale, where we felt we should scrutinise that and we should go further, and that did ask some questions. At this level, we have accepted that the complexity of the scheme and the heritage costs weren't reasonable to go further with that. So the starting point is officer judgment on that at these kind of scales.
I think
it's a choice we can make about whether we scrutinise further, but that was the decision taken.
I think it's worth bearing in mind that the information coming out of local plan work is that the population of the national park has dropped by about 2,000 over the last 10 or 12, 15 years or something of that sort, and the population is getting much older. So when it comes to school places, actually the case might be made better for providing accommodation for the elderly. But it's a case, look, it's a very important subject, and I don't in any way wish to belittle it. I think it's got to be put in the context of a policy process that enables us to insist upon it.
The only other case that we've had in the National Park where we've had a financial contribution was in Bakewell, where there was very strong evidence that there was an outstanding need to deliver in this settlement, and the District Council themselves said it would be helpful for contributions made to assist the costs of that scheme, which was the Colonel Wright Close scheme in Bakewell. So we haven't got that same evidence of the need in Middleton by Ilgrave available to us that's really pushed that. So that was by exception really, but because of the significance of the need in Bakewell.
Okay. Right. Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the same point. It's disappointing to see that about the affordable housing. This is the bit of this is one of the bits of the district that I'm closely involved with, and there are serious concerns about the lack of affordable housing, the conversion of properties to second homes and holiday lets, and that does look like that does seem likely in this situation. And I think it's frustrating to see a development which is already started. So that, as Ken said, this is retrospective. That they've sort of done a fait accompli with this isn't viable if we insist on affordable housing, when they've already started it, and that seems unfortunate. So I think if we can put some pressure on over the Section 106 for affordable housing, that would be good, because I wouldn't like to see large numbers of developments coming forward where we're being asked for retrospective planning permission, and that it's not the only way it's viable is if you give it without the Section 106 associated with it.
Right, well, where are we now? We have one proposal, no seconder so far, and we have the issue about whether it is or is not viable to insist upon a Section 106 agreement.
We've taken a view at an officer level based on the discussions that have gone on about the case in front of us. If members are telling us that we need to go back and do more work to scrutinise a viability assessment, I'll leave that with you.
I think that's the only thing we can do at this stage. Ken, well, you haven't got a seconder for yours. So
I'm quite happy to second this application, but you know, that bus has gone, 106 money, but we must be a bit smarter than any future ones.
Okay, that's very helpful, Ken. Thank you very much. Are there any amendments to Ken's motion in that case? On that basis, it is approved with the caveat for the future. Okay. Sorry, I beg your pardon. It is. I didn't mean to say approved. I meant to say moved with the caveat for the future. I do apologise. It is moved with the caveat for the future. All those in favour? All those against? Those abstaining? 1. Okay, that's good. Thank you. And the same thing on the listed building application. Would somebody move that? Would somebody second that? All those in favour of approving the listed building application? Anyone against? That is carried as well. Right, so we're now up to page 89 of the agenda, and it's agenda item 11, which is Sunnydale Farm, Quanford. Who's dealing with this one? You're dealing with it again, Adam, are you? Right.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is to the east of the A53 in open countryside, and you can just see there it's got a very long track which leads to it. So the property is up in this corner here. The site is in...
Sorry, can I just interrupt you? Members, but both this report and agenda item 12 cover largely the same subject. So I've asked if they introduce both of them, and we'll vote separately on each. Sorry, Adam.
It's okay, thank you. I should have said that myself. So the site is currently in use as a children's home / residential school / outdoor centre for up to 6 children. And that was since the 90s, and that was approved planning permission in the past. So we're looking at a condition imposed on those planning permissions. So there's 2 planning permissions that were granted, one for the change of use of the dwelling to the care home, and the other for an annex to it. So there was a total of 8 bedrooms for the use, which was for up to 6 children, with obviously staff on hand as well. And there were conditions imposed to control the use. There was a condition controlling the use class specifically to that purpose. There was a condition limiting the maximum number of children that could occupy the site to 6. But there was also a condition imposed imposing essentially what's called a personal consent, so that the then applicants were the only people who were able to operate the use. And subsequently, in the subsequent years, things have changed. So the original applicants no longer occupy the site, and the site is occupied by a different company, which has changed its name from the original company, and appears to have been operating in breach of the personal consent for a number of years. This application seeks to remove the personal consent element from both planning permissions, but doesn't propose to change in any way how the site is used or operated. So it's still going to be the same use, it's still going to be the same maximum number of children. It's not clear exactly, having looked back to the history, why a personal consent was imposed at the time. It seems to have been that was reflecting other decisions at the time. It's not normally current practice to grant something subject to a personal consent unless there are exceptional circumstances to do so. Normally you're looking at the proposed use and how you can control it and whether that's acceptable. So our policies currently allow for this type of development, and members may be aware or remember of similar developments being granted in the recent past, which have had restrictions on for example, on the use and the maximum number of children, but none of them have had a personal consent, because that generally isn't appropriate, as I say. So in officer's view, there's no planning reason why this use couldn't continue to operate by a different operator, by a different company, provided that the use is the same. So in both cases, the applications are recommended for approval subject to the reimposition of the conditions to control the use and control the maximum number of children. Hope I've explained that clearly.
Okay, I think it's fairly straightforward. Ken? I will second that for you. Any other members got any comments on this? Ginny?
Yes, just one comment. Obviously, the original permission was given with a set of conditions. They will continue with the condition following this. So condition 4 will just be removed, but all the others will remain in place.
So the operative conditions, which are ongoing conditions, will be repeated. So there are some conditions, for example, the time scale for implementation, the 3-year condition that we always put on. Obviously, we don't need to repeat that now because it has been implemented, but all the operative ongoing conditions will be kept. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I do think before we move to vote, the parish council have lodged objections, and I just wonder what the substance is to their crime fears, and to the highway issues and to the noise and disturbance. Has any information on that been supplied to planning officers on that?
I don't think we've had any evidence of it. So whether it's something that's happened in the past or just the fear of it possibly happening, it's difficult because perception of crime, fear of crime is capable of being a material consideration, but whether that rises to the point of it being an issue here, I don't think so. I mean, ultimately, the quality of care and the staffing is an Ofsted issue, and if there are any criminality, that would be a police matter. But the key thing here is we're really just considering the condition, which is the personal consent. And
I think if this was a new building or a new use, that would be a very pertinent issue. Ken?
I just felt it was important that the parish council's views were understood by the committee.
Ken?
Thanks, Chair. My comment is allied to Ginny's point about the numbering of conditions, or rather mine's about the numbering of conditions, because in the paper in 11 we're looking to remove condition 4, but in paragraph 55 of paper 12 it says, as outlined above, conditions 2 and 4 are necessary on the new planning permission to control the form and scale of the development. So although the recommendations are numbered 1 and 2, are they actually going to be numbered differently in?
I think they will. I think they will be.
Yeah, I managed to confuse myself.
I think it's
in
because
reading
there's
into
two
the
different
detail.
permissions with two different sets of conditions. So the precise numbering of the conditions on the original permissions is slightly different, but the new permission will both have the same conditions, and they'll both be condition 1 and 2. So they'll be uniform now. Right. But yeah.
But well spotted. Right. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. What? Oh yes, I beg your pardon. There are the 2 votes, and on the second application, is that also moved and seconded? Your yes, okay. All those in favour of the second vote, one, and those ones against, that's fully carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, page 109 of the agenda, agenda item 13, detached garage and ancillary living accommodation at Eaton Hill, Baslow. This is John Keeley taking us through this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This is the application site on the screen behind me. Home Close, it's a detached dwelling which is situated above Eaton Hill. It sits, you can see there, within a large curtilage. And access is taken off Eaton Hill up between property either side to where there is a large parking and turning area. This is the zoomed in, just to show you that. So this is the main house, the curtilage, access up from Eaton Hill. This is the parking area next to the house itself. There are 2 neighbouring properties, the closest of which is Eaton Cottage and Howard Cottage, with the proposed building sited in this corner we'll see in the ensuing slides. What you'll also see is there is a...
I couldn't see which corner.
In this corner here.
Thank you.
We'll see the plans in a moment. And there is a hedgerow between the two. It's important to note that that footprint of the cottage here isn't up to date on the Ordnance Survey maps, but you'll see that on the slides. So that's the proposed layout. And what's proposed is a single-storey building comprising one garage space and one ancillary living unit for a dependent relative. It would be 10 by 7 metres, sited in the corner there. It wouldn't impact on the existing parking or turning area. Adequate parking and turning would remain. And as we go through the slides, you'll see the setting much more clearly. So this is the location here, and this is the neighbouring property, the only one potentially impacted by the proposed development. But you can see here the hedgerow that stands between the neighbouring property and the proposed site. So moving through the slides, that's just zoomed in, and then just panning slightly to right to show the start of the house, which has been extended on this west side. A bit more detail, giving the character of the house. And then looking back from the back of the house across to the site. Just a slightly different time of year. And more of a close-up showing the height of the hedge, which at this point is between sort of 2.1 and 3, about 3 metres high. This is looking just behind the back of that hedgerow and fence, back at the neighbouring property, which is Eaton Cottage. So you can see the windows here on this side are the ones that face the application site and the building. The principal windows face down their garden, so it's secondary windows that are closest to the application site. This again just looks a couple more shots that just look down the side of the boundary, showing that relationship in a bit more detail. So moving to the plans themselves of the building, that just shows the existing layout and as proposed. So you have a single garage space and then a small one-bedroom dependent relative unit. Access from the front. The rear wall is blank. There is a small conservation roof light proposed on that rear. So in terms of the principle, there are no problems about building a garage within the curtilage of a residential dwelling. And our policies also allow for ancillary dwellings subject to the criteria set out in the policy and our supplementary planning guidance. This is small in scale. It's directly related to the need. It's sized for that need. It's subservient to the main house. And in our view, it doesn't compromise either the parking or the turning area. Doesn't impact on the wider landscape, and neither does, in our view, it impact on neighbours' amenity. We do note the neighbours' concern about various aspects. The key issue is the relationship to the immediate neighbouring property. And I think this slide shows quite clearly the relationship of the rear wall of the proposed garage and annex to the existing hedgerow. So up to eaves level, it's easily covered by the existing hedge with the slightly taller section of hedge. First part is beech, the second part is pleached hornbeam. That goes part way up the roof. So although it is close to the neighbour's property, that roof that runs away means that it doesn't impact in either overbearing terms or any direct overlooking between the two properties. So in our view, in amenity terms, it is acceptable. In terms of details, this would be the elevation facing the neighbour. And as I say, the hedge covers up to half, part way up the roof here. So they would just see a roof that runs away from them. The roof would be in natural blue slate. The walling would be natural gritstone to match the main house. So I beg your pardon, it's not blue slate, it's clay tiles in this case to match the house. And round the front elevation, you'd have standard timber garage door, timber doors to the annex, and there are solar panels on that front, sort of south-facing slope to aid the sustainability of the proposed dwelling. So, in our view, Chair, the recommendation is one of approval. It meets our policies and causes no harm to the neighbours or amenity of the local area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers. I've got Mr. David Dawson and Mr. Lee Ellis-Edge, both against. Have I got those in the right order? Yeah, okay. So, Mr. Dawson, you've probably been watching and understand what goes on, but there's a little button in front of you that will turn the microphone on, and you have 3 minutes to tell us what you want to say.
Thank you. I'm Dr. David Dawson of Howard Cottage. Mr. Ellis-Edge and I have both objected, and we've liaised to make our presentations complementary today. I want to make 4 points. First, there is actually no clear need for this development. The applicants state that their elderly relative is fiercely independent and so clearly does not need the accommodation now. They also state it will take 2 to 3 years to find a builder, let alone complete it. My clinical experience shows the unpredictability of health and medical conditions over that time. It may be that there will never be a need for this accommodation. Second, the planning officer has not adequately tested alternative options. Home Close has one of the largest domestic plots in Baslow, as you've seen. Sold in 2005 as a 5-bedroomed house, it has been extensively renovated and extended since. It's inconceivable that it could not be reconfigured to meet the needs of an elderly relative. Mr. Palmer states that the house needs to accommodate 3 children, 2 of whom have partners, but neglects to state that they're all adult and rarely resident. In their renovations, the applicants have deliberately chosen to convert an integral garage to a study and to remove a previous wooden double garage. These could have been either converted or rebuilt to meet the needs of the relative. Being closer to the main house, they might have been more suitable. The position of the old garage is actually shown on your site plan on page 117 of your papers and serves to highlight that alternatives are available which would have less impact on neighbour amenity. The applicants have also failed to mention another property owned by Mr. Palmer, close by in Rowland, less than 10 minutes drive away. This is currently vacant and was previously occupied by an elderly person living alone. It's perhaps even more suitable than Home Close for someone who is fiercely independent. In short, this application does not meet the expectations of your development management policy at paragraphs 684, 86 and 87, that extensions to an existing dwelling will be preferred for granny annex accommodation, and new buildings can only be considered when no other options exist. They do, and the planning officer is thus wrong in her conclusion. My third point is the impact on neighbour amenity. Being greater for Eaton Cottage, this will be fully addressed by Mr. Ellis-Edge, but one point is relevant to Howard Cottage. Because of the contours of the hill, it lies considerably below Home Close, so the visual impact of the development would be magnified and become overbearing. My final important point questions the overall validity of the officer's report. Statements made by the applicant seem to have been accepted in full, whereas those from objectors have been dismissed without proper consideration. That treatment differs markedly from some of the other items on your agenda today. The report is lacking in so many respects that there is no safe basis for approval. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. And now I want to Mr. Ellis-Edge. You've got the hang of the thing. You've got 3 minutes, Mr. Ellis-Edge. No, you want to turn it on. You've just turned it off.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was turning it on then.
That takes you off air.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As you know, I'm Lee Ellis-Edge, and along with my wife, Sarah, we own Eaton Cottage, the property most affected, as you've seen on some of the photographs. And as indicated by David, we've liaised, hopefully with a view to our points being helping you with a view to why we say the application should be rejected. My focus is neighbour amenity, and I have 4 points in respect of the same. Firstly, Section 5 of the authority's supplemental guidance sets out the criteria that must be met for the development to be acceptable as per policy DMH5 and case law. One of those criteria, as accepted by Mr Keeley, is that the development respects neighbour amenity. If a development does not, then it cannot be approved. There's no weighing in the balance of the respective criteria. If one looks at the officer's report that's in your pack, and if you turn to page 114, where the officer deals with the criteria for new build residential annexes, there is absolutely no mention, let alone consideration, of neighbour amenity. It is simply not dealt with. That's my first point. Secondly, our objections are concerned with the overshadowing and overbearing presence of the development and the loss of light to be caused. I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but the right to light is enshrined in law. Again, the planning officer's analysis of amenity is brief, and it doesn't even touch upon, let alone consider, the specific and legitimate planning objections. Thirdly, the planning officer, to the extent they do give any reasons, gives two. They are on page 115, paragraphs 56 to 58. They are: the development would be largely screened by the hedge which is currently on the screen, and that the garage or development is of a typical scale and design. These do not bear even the remotest of scrutiny. If I take them in reverse order, it cannot be the case that scale and design otherwise overrides neighbour amenity. It would therefore, every planning application would therefore pass regardless of impact on amenity. So it cannot be right in our view. Turning to the hedge, the objections are in relation to it being overshadowing, overbearing and loss of light. I've just got one point I make.
If you just wind up, yes.
But both objections arise because of the height of the proposed development and its location on the boundary, as you have seen. The screen will not, the hedge doesn't screen the development, and indeed is not a reason as to why it doesn't cause a loss of light and it isn't overshadowing or overbearing. If the officer had visited our property, she would have seen this. She didn't. She did visit the applicant's property. This strikes us as distinctly unfair and is another reason why this application should be rejected. And thank you for your time. Apologies, I've slightly run over.
Thank you very much. And I've now got the applicant, Mr. Palmer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You now understand the system, don't you? Leave it on.
I'm not going to touch it.
Leave it on, yes.
My name's Tom Palmer. I'm the applicant for this scheme. Firstly, a big thank you to the planning officer for the thorough report and recommendation of approval. We appreciate that very much. One aim here is to provide some independent accommodation for Granny, who would like to come and live with us so we can support her and care for her as she ages. She's starting to experience poor health, as you can expect as one approaches 80 years of age. We want to ensure she has the same sense of comfort and security that she's had throughout her life. She is fiercely independent and is very clear that she still needs her own independent living space, and we think that's very understandable. We understand it's a very big responsibility to provide care for one's elderly relatives, but we're very grateful for all she has done for us over the years, and my wife is a medical professional. We initially looked at plans when Grandpa was alive, but his health deteriorated too quickly to get suitable arrangements in place. And so we're asking for permission now to create suitable accommodation for Granny. It'll probably take, yes, 18 months, 2 years to get the building finished, which should be timely for her. So we believe we're asking for the minimum development that would facilitate these plans, and we ask the committee for their support. Briefly addressing the objections you've just heard, this is a very modest development. We made it very clear to the architect right from the outset this should be the most modest development possible to achieve the function. The planning officer's report itself uses the word modest 4 times. We did this to minimise any impact to our neighbours, and so it's disappointing to see they're opposed. I can only defer to the planning officer's impartial conclusion. She has visited the site twice, and concludes, and I quote from the report, given the scale, design and siting of the building, we conclude that whilst the building may be visible from neighbouring properties, it would cause no harm or adverse impact on their amenity. And this minimal impact is in part because of the siting and the screening, which is 3.3 metres high. And that means the planning officer was able to conclude, and again I quote here, given the single-storey height of the building and the intervening beech hedgerow, the impact of the roof form above the hedge is not considered to be harmful to the amenity of the neighbouring property in terms of scale or appearance, end quote. And this logic would also apply in the same way to objections about loss of light. So thank you for your consideration of our application, and obviously we ask you to follow the recommendation for approval from the planning officer.
Thank you very much. Right. Could I just pick up one point, which I can't remember which speaker said it. This reference to paragraph 6.84 of, I think it's the development management policies, where it is said that that we would normally insist upon an extension before we looked at other options when we came to consider this sort of thing. I don't know the paragraph myself, but what was that? Do you understand the point that it was made?
Yes, I do, Chair. We don't insist upon that. I've not got the precise policy wording in front of me, unfortunately, but it is something that we do look at. So if we were giving pre-application advice, on some cases we would suggest that before looking at buildings within the grounds, but we don't rule out buildings in the grounds of a suitable scale, and the policy does allow for that. It's not always suitable in every circumstance, so it's horses for courses really, depending on the individual character of the property. In this case, there's no concerns about having a separate building. The existing house has been substantially extended already, and we've heard some of the other reasons from the applicant why they would prefer a separate building to give some autonomy rather than extend the house again.
Well, I can understand that, yeah. Right, members. Any thoughts on this? I must confess, if I can just help, I'm struggling to work out what the amenity objections are here. I can see that there's a concern about what you might call view, but we're not entitled to protect personal views. I'm struggling with what the amenity objection is. I don't know whether any members have picked that up yet and thought about it. But amenity is normally about noise or smoke or smell or those sorts of things, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's not because you can see something. No.
Could I suggest we go through them on paragraph 54? They're listed: overshadowing, loss of privacy, loss of daylight, overlooking, and loss of amenity. I mean, how would you respond to the criticism that this development would be overshadowing? I mean, I can't see it myself, but then I'm not living next door to the property.
If you look at the pictures of the neighbouring property, that's one. Go back to it. There's a hedge there, and you can see where the shadow is of the hedge. I'm not sure whether...
And the building would be... The development would be where?
It would be immediately to the left. This is the boundary between the two. So this is the hedge. So in the corner there, that's where the building would be. You perhaps see the relationship more when you move to the photograph, which... Yeah, so the building sits in this corner here. So it's so the eaves will be about this high. They would see the hedge, and then they would see the roof just moving away from them. The eaves is about 2.3 meters high. No windows on the back. They would see the roof, and they would just see the slight profile of the roof light. And the roof light's well above head height within the building, so there's no outlook back to the neighbour.
So the same then would be for the loss of privacy?
Yes.
That there would be no effective change there. The building's not tall enough to lead to a loss of daylight?
We don't believe so, no.
there's no overlooking because there's no windows looking out.
Correct.
Neighbouring properties.
I do have one question. If the hedges are so important, is there plenty of space for them to grow and be maintained?
Yes, it's quite close, but there's no concerns about the it's space just enough to avoid that on the plans. So there is a margin, and don't forget this is a hard surface tarmac turning area anyway. So there's a growing strip down there and a little bit of buffer.
This room. So I'm just trying to work out how tall this building is. I've worked out that it's roughly twice my height. Then I'm trying to work out whether how tall it is. Yeah.
Yeah, these will be approximately 2.3, 2.4 metres on the boundary.
What's the height of the eaves? The eaves. No, that's the ridge, isn't it? Meters for the ridge, for the eaves. Well, that is about my height, which is not a huge. Well, I don't think it is anyway. A huge amount. Well, members, Ginny, and then Ken.
It's a question about the hedge. Whose ownership is the hedge?
I think it's in the applicant's.
It's the applicant or the neighbour?
Applicant.
It's the applicant. So could that be a condition that the hedge is kept in at that height? Can we make that a condition? Because it seems that the hedge is quite significant here.
Yes, it is in both their interest to maintain that for the privacy reasons.
Well, you're not really, but if.
So maybe I could say something about the hedge, because the hedge and the planning officer again has glossed over this, is itself contentious.
Oh, right.
Because it's over 3 metres high. It's right on the boundary. And so you're talking about this hedge screening this property, but actually the hedge itself is contentious, as the applicant well knows. And forgive me, but this is yet another reason why. And you're talking about amenity here with this meeting, but actually the planning officer just doesn't consider it in relation to the residential act. It's there, page 114, it is simply not considered. None of the objections that are listed, which the member mentioned, are then actually considered for the purposes of dealing with the criteria for residential annexes. They're just not.
Ken, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, because this is a dwelling, what's the spatial from that point to the nearest point on the neighbour's property?
Sorry, I was just distracted. We're just having a slight computer issue here. Was the question the distance between the
Dwelling,
dwelling?
the proposed dwelling and the neighbour's dwelling.
Don't have that. I believe it's around about 5 metres. I don't have the exact measurement.
You're considering putting weight on those things now.
When you, I'm going back to Mike Chaplin's list on paragraph 54. There cannot be here appreciable overshadowing, given the distances involved and the heights of the buildings and the fact that they've got a sloping roof. The building backs on to adjoining properties or sides on to adjoining properties without any windows overlooking them, so loss of privacy can't apply. Loss of daylight, that photograph suggests that there's going to be ample daylight at certain times of day with the adjoining property. Overlooking can't be an issue because of the window issue that I've described earlier. And I have to be honest with members, I'm not really understanding what the amenity issue is beyond those. And on that basis, I'm going to move this application for approval. Is that seconded? Do any members have any comments on that? No, in that case, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour? Anyone against? Okay, that is carried. Thank you. Right, the next item on the agenda is agenda item 14, page
Chair.
119 of the agenda.
We just have a technical issue with the presentation at the moment. We just called somebody from IT, so hopefully we can get that resolved very quickly for you.
Another IT break. So Resuming now on agenda item 14, former Filter House, Long Causeway, Sheffield. Before we go on, it is 12 minutes to 1, so can I have the usual resolution to proceed past 1 o'clock, which I presume will go with it. I'm proposing it, somebody seconding it, and all in favour? Yes, good, that's okay. Okay. And just as by way of comment, I think this is a report that the officers have put last on the agenda because it's got that delightful thing, a disagreement between officers. For us. It's a sort of Christmas present to us to enjoy. But I'm sure we won't get to that stage. Would you like to introduce it, please, John?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the proposal is a full application for the demolition of the existing filter house and the erection of 3 new dwellings with associated landscaping and parking. They would be market dwellings, just for clarification. And as the Chair alluded to, the two sort of key issues in this are, one is whether the building filter house is the interest within that, whether it amounts to a non-designated heritage asset, and whether it's appropriate to replace that with a development, and whether that development in itself is of sufficient quality to meet our policies. So I'll lead you through the slides in the normal way. This is the red application site towards the bottom of this slide. It's a 1.1 acre site lying within a block of woodland which sits between the Red Myers Lower Reservoir and the road that comes up from Lodgemore, edge of Sheffield, just outside the National Park boundary, and then continues on past the site up to Long Causeway and eventually up to Stanish Pole. So that's the main road there. This is off that road. There's an access which comes down, serves the old filter house, a new filter building. This is a covered reservoir that's still in operation with the existing water use in the area. We have a single detached dwelling there and a pair of cottages here. And this is the application site. Just south of this is the lower reservoir and the embankment of that reservoir. The filter house was built back in the 1948, commissioned in 1950 to filter water from these reservoirs and down into Sheffield. It was sold by the Yorkshire Water back in 2013 and has lain empty ever since. And you'll see as I go through the slides that it's lain empty since then, is falling into disrepair and on the edge of what you probably argue is dereliction now, but I'll lead you through the slides. This is just zoomed in. We have the existing access drive from there leading into the building itself. Access has to be maintained through the site because just at this end there is an existing operational Yorkshire Water building that needs to be access maintained. I should also mention, just before moving from the last slide, is that there are 2 rights of way. One public footpath to the west of the application site, and then a concession path which leads off to the south. So you'll get views into the site through the trees from both of those, glimpse views from both of those locations. Just a few slides now showing the context. So this is the filter house, and the access lies behind and to the right of the photography in this slide. So you've got there the detached house to the right and the pair of semi-cottages to the left. And then the access road in the middle, which leads in the distance up to the main road. This is the drive, looking with the filter house behind the viewer again in this. This is the drive down to that point where the last photograph was taken, the access. So just behind that wall on the left is where the concession path runs. And from that concession path you can just see into the site, and you begin to see the beginnings of the filter house building. So zoomed in, see that's the main entrance into it, with a driveway off to the left around that leads to the other building. And then just looking back from that corner back down the drive. So zoomed in, that's the building. It's faced in brown brick with some natural gritstone detailing around the windows. The windows were metal with timber doors, but all the windows, well, most of the windows were gone, and the timber doors have gone as well. And then looking down the north side of the building, you can just see in the distance, this is the building that has to be retained. That's Yorkshire Water's operational one, just off the end of the site. More detail of that and the end of this building. And then looking back across that northern edge. So in footprint terms, we carried out a site visit yesterday. Couldn't go inside the building, but we looked inside. There is a pit which appeared more like a stream yesterday. There's the remnants of these large tanks. This area here is at a higher level than this lower level. And then there are various sort of offices and rooms on this side. I'll just skim through these because these just show the existing building in elevation terms. That's the bit down the north side. The end we saw. And then I didn't have a slide of the rear. That's the rear elevation. So before I move on to the... Oh, that's just a section, as I said through, that shows the difference between this tank room at a higher level, the service channel, the main hall where all the equipment has been removed from, and this smaller flat roof section at the front. You'll see in the report and note from the planning history that officers have given advice on this site on a few occasions, starting in 2019 and more recently, that we regarded the building as not being worthy of conversion. This is, of course, only planning officers' informal advice, but more pertinent to note and to give weight to is the fact that last year we refused planning permission under delegated powers for the conversion of the building to 9 holiday units, taking the view within that report that the building wasn't a traditional building of historic or vernacular merit in the terms of our policy, which defines what a traditional building is. Having said that, whilst it's not a traditional building, it is nevertheless an example of post-war modernist architecture, which, as we saw in the photographs, is utilitarian and very functional in its character. It was built for the water industry, and common with most of those, you can see there is some, potentially because it was just post-war, some modest embellishment of the design with the natural stone detailing around the windows and doors. And there was quite a nice plaque to the date stone and the water company on above the main door. Those lift what's otherwise a rather bland brown brick frontage facade to the building. And as we saw from those photographs on the site yesterday, it suffered really badly. So on balance, officers have concluded that it wouldn't be an appropriate candidate to conserve through another use. And therefore we've supported the principle in some pre-application steer that its replacement for housing would be in principle acceptable, provided it met the very high bar of significant enhancement, which is required to meet policy GSP2, bearing in mind that the site is in the open countryside, where there is a presumption against development unless there are exceptional circumstances. And as we can see, this is a brownfield site which lies well beyond any settlement. And as our policies say, it needs to be judged against the development strategy, DS1 and GSP2. So those policies do allow for development and alternative uses to secure effective conservation and enhancement, with GSP2 requiring schemes to achieve significant overall benefit to the natural beauty, wildlife and cultural heritage. So it's a high bar to pass with schemes wanting to benefit from that policy exception. In this case, we've concluded, and I'll go through the slides of the proposed houses in a moment, that provided the building is properly recorded, with a written scheme of investigation for building recording to record what's there at the moment, that it can be redeveloped, provided that the the scheme before us here is deemed to be a high standard of design, and its impact on the landscape is acceptable to meet that GSP2 test. So I'll lead you through the proposed replacement buildings now. This is the proposed layout. So we have the building demolished, and as I said before, the driveway has to remain to give access to this operational building for Yorkshire Water. What's proposed is a detached 5-bedroom dwelling on the north side with a double garage, walled boundaries, and on the sort of south side, I'll call it, is 2 4-bedroom dwellings, 2-storey at either end with a single-storey linking elements, private gardens to the rear, parking to the front, and there's a small lean-to on this end. These 2 dwellings on each side have an integral garage, a single integral garage at either end. So a couple of visuals to indicate how the development might appear from an aerial view. So there's the detached dwelling, double garage, dwelling 2 shall we call it, and dwelling 3 here with a single storey element in between. Loosely arranged to give a farmstead style or a nod to that type of development. All in natural gritstone, blue slate roofs with natural gritstone surrounds of varying thicknesses. They would have a certain contemporary feel because the surrounds are a little bit different to normal we'll see in the elevations. And then a parking courtyard, private gardens then off to the right. The land rises to the embankment. We heard on site yesterday that although there's really good tree cover, there's mixed evergreen and deciduous trees on site. There are a number of larch which were being removed because they were suffering from the larch disease, which has affected many trees in the national park. So this is a view looking up the driveway, give you an impression of the completed development. So just going through the detailed plan. So this is the front elevation of the detached house. It would be 2.5 stories with bedrooms in the roof space. What you've got there on the roof in the centre are 2 solar heating panels to help the sustainability credentials of the house. Aluminium windows and door frames. And then this is the rear roof lights. You see in the report from submission, the planning officer gained some amendments to get rid, in this instance, improve fenestration, the removal of the flat roof and changing that to a lean-to in this location here, which is kept at the same scale, hence the slightly low-pitch roof on that rear lean-to. The 2 gable elevations of that. And then a section showing the rooms in the roof space. As I said, 5 bedrooms in this case with open sort of family room within the lean-to on the back. And then the roof plan. This is the garage that goes with that plot. Fairly simple, door to the front, plain elsewhere. Then the 2 4-bedroom dwellings at either end. That's the roof plan. And then floor plans. Again, with an open plan sort of family room on the central area. So from the access drive, it's a fairly plain front, but at the back there is substantial glazing into the private garden area with a slightly oversailing of the roof from that point. And we have a single garage space, and in this case, on the entrance into that little courtyard, they've got a workshop on that side. And then the elevation of that as you approach that we saw in the visual. The gable end, and this is facing the access driveway. The 2 single-storey elements link together. There's a passageway to get into the private rear garden, but they link. And then looking back, this is the single-storey element, the private section looking into the private garden. And then that's from the rear. again, you've got the solar water heating panels on the roof there. And a section of that single-storey section just showing this roof overhang into the private side. The other one is almost a mirror image at the other end, so I'll run through those. Again, 4 bedrooms, single-storey section, single garage, access from the other side of the site. I think you might not be able to pick out at this range that whilst on the detached dwelling you had fairly strong, traditional-looking, thick surrounds in gritstone to the windows, on many of these you've got much thinner ashlar ones, which is a characteristic of this architect's style. And some of the windows, it appears that they don't have that at all. They're just very simple, just a frame within the stonework, giving that contemporary look. Again, that's looking back through the junction. And then the far end, with the Yorkshire Water remaining building behind you, looking back at that gable, that elevation rather. And again, the private elevation. In terms of the site, as I said, there's a number of trees we saw around the boundary. Most of those remain. There are 5 that have to be removed, 3 small ones here and 2 single ones there, but they will be replaced by further planting, which our tree conservation officer has no concerns about. So I won't dwell on that. There is a large tree down this end, so there would be a no-dig zone within the root protection area there to protect that particular tree. And that's just shown in yellow there. So, to summarise, whilst the existing filter building does have some significance in terms of its part that it played in the heritage of the water industry in this valley, it's not a traditional building in terms of our policies, although we do note very carefully the view from our other colleagues that it is nonetheless a non-designated heritage asset. We feel it's got to the point too far that it's not possible to retain that and support the application. The 3 buildings are of a high standard of design, but subject to conditions covering the WSI to record the existing building I spoke about earlier, and a further condition to allow officers to negotiate some further minor detailed amendments to the detailing and the architectural points on the building. The recommendation is one of approval, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We have one speaker, Mr. Struthers, who we met on site yesterday.
Thank you.
Right, we're ready when you are.
Thanks. So my name is Alistair Struthers. I'm the project architect who's been responsible for the design and the subsequent planning submission of the scheme. My practice, Peak Architects, are a well-established housing architects based in Hathertage and in Sheffield. We've been working in the National Park for 15 years. Following the officer's report and recommendation for approval, I'm just going to provide some supporting narrative on the key points in the hope that these provide some clarification and reassurance to the members. First point is in regards to the question of demolition and conversion. Peak Architects were appointed in 2020 to work on the previous owner's scheme to retain and convert the filter house into holiday let accommodation. Pre-app advice advised an application was unlikely to be supported, as the Peak Park had already previously advised that the building was not worthy of conversion. Despite that, we pressed ahead with an application and had a heritage report to justify retention of the existing building. Despite that, the application was refused, and the reasons, as Mr. Keeley went into, were that the proposed change was unacceptable in principle, as it included the conversion of a building which was not a traditional building. The second reason, which Mr. Keeley didn't have in his report, was the design was poor because it would add longevity to a building which was not worthy of conversion, which detracted from the character and appearance of the area. The proposal was also contrary to policy, as it missed an opportunity to enhance the site by removing the building and redeveloping the site. Following that refusal, the site was sold to the current applicant, our client, and we were reappointed earlier this year to design a proposal that responded to that feedback and enhance the setting by removing the existing undesirable building. That brings me to the second point, which is the enhancements of the site. So Peak Architects agree with the planning department that replacement of the existing building in its current state would provide significant overall benefit to the area. During my work on the project, I've visited site many times, and as with you yesterday, it's clear that the site and the building itself has become derelict. It's an increasingly vandalised building. It's in a serious state of disrepair, and it detracts from the area and the context. Not only does the site itself pose a risk to intruders, but crucially, local residents have safety concerns with the antisocial behaviour that's evident at the isolated site. Conversely, redevelopment of the site would allow us to reduce the volume and area of the buildings to lessen the impact of the built structures by as much as 23%, creating much needed sustainable family homes in a contextual style. The designs, as Mr. Keeley said, propose a farmstead type cluster of 3 homes with a courtyard layout to allow access to the rear substation. The layout, the site strategy, shall I finish this point?
Finish your point, please.
Yeah. Materiality, detailing, massing have been carefully designed in accordance with the Peak District Design Guide at all stages. And we believe the result is a sensitively designed collection of family homes that will transform the tricky and neglected sites and enhance the area. And that's all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It might, I don't know how the discussion's going to develop, but it might be helpful if you stayed where you are, just in case issues come up. Right, members. 2 issues here. The first is the nature of the existing buildings and whether they are of a quality and nature that suggests that we should insist upon them being renovated rather than new development. And the second issue, of course, is the acceptability of the development proposed as an alternative. So those are the 2 sides of the coin, and I think we need to keep our eye very clearly on that. Just to ramble on a bit, I remember for a long time after I first came here that almost every discussion in the planning committee centred around words such as traditional buildings, vernacular buildings, and similar kind of things, and we hear it a lot today. We've heard it around the table actually just now. And I think whatever else comes out of this discussion, we need to be grateful for the comments that we've received, both from conservation and for the local plans, that brings to our attention the need to have regard to the less obvious buildings. We've done it once or twice in the past. We did it at Lower Bradfield, where it's working. We did it at Hurst Dam in Glossop. But we do keep thinking about the valuable buildings we have as being traditional, vernacular, and so on and so forth. And buildings do come along, which do have an importance in history and do have an architectural importance, which actually post-date the year 1919, which seems to be a magical date for conservation officers. And we do need to keep that in mind. And I'm actually very grateful to those officers for just reminding us about that. And I hope that it'll be a prompt in the office in the future just to think about things a bit further. I'll pin that up as one point. We used to have a member of this authority called Godfrey Claff, who was an associate of Ian, who isn't with us today. And he always used to make the point that a lot of these more modern buildings are also part of the story of this national park, one way or another. And that we should recognise that even the little square bungalows with pyramidal roofs, which the officers keep trying to get rid of, are actually part of the history of this national park and the way it developed. And we need to understand and recognise that in the way we make decisions. And I think Godfrey Claff's point is a good one, because we have to bear that in mind. At the same time, I do think we have to be realistic about what we should preserve and what we shouldn't preserve. It's very important that we record our history, that we recognise it, that we take photographs of it or whatever the case may be. But sometimes there's something better round the corner. And I've just, for example, mentioned the Hurst Dam development. We actually got rid of an entire dam, which must have been a local heritage asset, in order to provide a better solution, which was an open valley with the moorland and everything else. So just because you put the word heritage on it or history on it, you've got to balance things one against the other all the time. And I think this is, in a sense, what we've really got to try and do here. And so when I start to look at this building, I recognise the basic point that's been made, which is that it has a design of its time and so on and so forth. But I then go on to say, is that a building that we should insist upon keeping? Or perhaps when the first application came in, should we have allowed it? There's a difference between allowing a building like that to be conserved and making the best out of it, and insisting upon it, which is, in a sense, what's being asked for here. So I think we need to be balanced about that sort of approach when we're looking at it. So I would really like members, particularly those who went on site yesterday, just to give us a feel for what they thought about this as a heritage building that ought to be, or ought not, as the case may be, to be conserved. Because until we get a view on that, it's difficult then to judge the application we've got in front of us. Ken?
Yeah, I just happened to be on Google and there's some great photos and all back end the building's going to drop off if something's not done.
Yeah.
But my concern is, I've got no concerns about this application, it's great. But there's a keystone above the door and I'd like that to be retained into external boundary walls if possible.
I was going to make exactly the same point later
and
on.
My next question is, due to where it is there any open water close to this development and will that be sufficiently fenced off? Thank you.
All right. Ken, you put your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to respond to the points that you were making about the building. I mean, I think John made the point, and I would endorse what he said, that the buildings can have a heritage interest without being traditional. I mean, the point that you were making as well. I think it's good that we recognise that. It's appropriate that we recognise that. I think one of the issues is that the more we progress into the modern period, the nature of the materials that are used have a shortened life. And that brings with it all manner of issues to do with conservation and the rest. All that notwithstanding, I think it was fairly evident to those of us who were on site yesterday, and from some of the slides that John has used in his presentation, that the walls have significantly deteriorated, and there's a lot of cracking, a lot of movement that I think would make conservation of the existing building non-viable, which seems to be the word that we've been using from time to time today. So I think that the proposal to establish what is sometimes known as preservation by record, a record of the building before it is demolished, would be appropriate in this instance, and that sweeping it away is the viable option and replacement with an alternative form of housing as is being proposed. And I was going to make the point that Ken has made and as Mike made on site, and you were going to make about the retention of the plaque and its incorporation into the, which I think we mentioned with Alistair yesterday on site, and he was amenable to the idea as well. But that was all, Chair.
Thank you. Other members? Martin?
Right, I was at the visit yesterday as well, and I agree with Ken in that the building is in quite a perilous condition because it's been vandalised and has deteriorated over the period that there's been discussions. It's a typical early post-war utility building, of which there are quite a number around. It's well hidden. It's not. It wouldn't. And I can't see any viable alternative use for it apart from a housing solution. It needs recording, but I think we should should approve this proposal as it gives as it gives housing in a useful housing and turns the site into a useful function.
Thank you. Right, Honourable Member for Sheffield.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Chair. I mean, I think the sentiments have already been expressed by both Malcolm, Ken and, well, both Kens. A similar view with the plaque, as I was the first to raise it on site, that should be kept. And if it can't be built into the boundary wall, because I would hate to see it built into the boundary wall and then that come in for being defaced or vandalised. So
I don't think it necessarily has to go onto a boundary wall. It could actually go on the side of a house or anything. So that's to be debated. Matt.
It's frustrating. I think the point that you made earlier on about it being that it's not worthy of preservation, and therefore, you know, rather than insisting on it, it's disappointing that we're not that aspect of cultural heritage hasn't been recognised, and from the point that the application came in before. Now, it might not have been appropriate for there to be 9 holiday cottages, but this is, you know, cultural heritage. Cultural heritage isn't just the recreation of building styles that were there traditionally. You know, that was built at the time and was felt to be appropriate at the time, and it would be, you know, and so in some ways it would have been good when it wasn't derelict for us to do something about it. And we're not talking about ripping down derelict barns all over the national park because they're no longer, because they're falling down. But we are replacing a building which was of its time with something which is essentially a pastiche of vernacular buildings, and that, you know, it makes it very difficult when other things come in, because we say, well, it's not in keeping with its surroundings. This is, you know, this proposed extension isn't in keeping with its surroundings. Well, if we keep on only building buildings which are traditional vernacular buildings, then everything has got to be, a traditional vernacular building, even if it's being built now. Does that make sense? That actually, you know, recognising the changing the nature of buildings is actually part of the cultural heritage, as everybody has said. But I don't think we should be thinking, actually, what we need to do here, and this isn't a criticism of the development which is proposed, what we need to do here is to build the same buildings that were built in this area because of the reasons that they were built here in this area in the first place.
I totally get that point, actually. I always think the word pastiche, or indeed faux, which appears 2 or 3 times in this report, is a bit unfortunate, because in many ways, almost any style of architecture derives from something earlier. I mean, that beautiful building at the back of this place was probably never been built. It wasn't for the Bauhaus movement. It all starts somewhere. But you do bring up a point which I would just like to get the officer's view on, because I don't have any sort of real problems with the broad approach being taken in these plans. I am a little bit concerned about some of the sort of window arrangements and the huge number of roof lights there are, and we're always worrying about dark skies and all the rest of it. And I'm wondering whether the officer view is that this is the best we're going to get, or whether there are serious improvements which could be made if we once blow the whistle and say, yeah, get on and do it, and don't worry about the old building. Any thoughts?
Yes, I think you've got a point there. Once you've determined the first part of the key issue about the character of the existing building on site, you move on to this. I do feel, although this was an unbalanced recommendation of what we've got before us, there are some elements in there which, shall I say, could be improved upon. There are some weak corners, and we could do with some more clarification about the detailing of windows and doors. But anything going beyond that, I'd appreciate a steer from members themselves as to how far you want us to go in terms of the overall scale of development. Obviously, the numbers housing was advised by the viability side of things, but are you happy for us to liaise with the applicant over fenestration, roof lights? Because clearly we could improve that side of things if you feel the overall mass and scale of development is appropriate.
Well, can I put it this way round? There is a certain amount of ingenuity which has gone into tracing this through to the point where you think this can be approved. I think in normal circumstances, we probably wouldn't be thinking about development on this site unless it came within the broad area of innovative, good architecture, which the government encourages in the National Planning Policy Framework for isolated sites in the countryside. And I would like to feel that whatever we're building here is actually the heritage of the future. And I have studied architecture in the past, but I'm not I'm not in a position to say whether this is really the best that can be achieved on the site or not. But if we wash our hands of the old building for the moment, subject to the reservations that have been made, my question is this really the best we can get out of the site? And depending on what the rest of the committee say, that would be what I'd like you to go ahead and make sure you get. But to try and cut a long story short, because it's 1:25, I'm going to move the following resolution, thinking about it on my feet, that we accept in principle the demolition of the existing buildings, and we accept in principle its replacement by a housing development, and that that the application thereafter be deferred for the officers to go and get the best they can out of the site, or words to that effect. Does that make sense? That's my motion. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Yes, within that motion, can we just also add which has been discussed already, making sure that we very fully document all the historic building that would be demolished.
Right, Matt?
It would be. It's not a site that would be allowed generally, but it's effectively. It's not a site that would be allowed generally. It is a brownfield site. It'd be really good to see an exemplar of this sort of development. Again, as you say, so the heritage of the future.
So are you seconding my motion?
I am seconding your motion, but I would like to see some really good climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Okay, Adam, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Again, similar to previously, would it be deferral subject to coming back to committee once the design's been resolved, or delegated powers?
I think we'd like to see it back, actually. I think because we've taken a lot of interest in this, I think we'd like to see it back, if that's all right. Yeah. Lee?
Yes, Chair. Just as a point, we are keeping it at 3 dwellings, aren't we? We're keeping it limited to three dwellings on any alteration.
Yeah, any sort of amendment would have to be within the scope of this planning application, so we couldn't make any fundamental changes.
That's a good question. Right, anybody got any comments further on that? In that case, I'm going to put to the vote the motion that I've just put. All those in favour? And what's the matter?
I'm wondering if we're absolutely clear on what the motion is. I've got a note of it. Do you want me?
Well, I was clear about what it was.
Okay.
You've got it, haven't you?
I've got a note on
Yes, I think
I wanted the recording of the historic.
we'll include that in it, yes. Yes. If you like.
So,
As long as it's good.
So move basically that the principle of demolition is accepted, and replacement is accepted, subject to officers securing the best possible design and written scheme of investigation, and retaining the plaque, and then once that design's been negotiated, return back to committee.
Climate change.
And climate change measures. Okay.
Okay. So are we all happy with that? All those in favour? Anyone against? Are you happy with the way that's gone? Yes. Okay, good. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Now we move on to agenda item 15, which I hope won't take too long. Lee, this is your patch. Well, sort of, anyway.
Just let me know when I turn on my
That's right. Right. Okay. Right. I hope this is straightforward. Okay. Right. Brampton Neighbourhood Plan, agenda item 15. Would you like to introduce the report, please?
Thank you. At the October Planning Committee, members approved the Brampton Neighbourhood Plan to proceed to a public referendum. The referendum was held on Tuesday the 21st of November and asked residents whether they wanted the North East Derbyshire District Council and the Peak District National Park to use the Brampton Neighbourhood Plan to help decide planning applications in their area. This resulted in 86 people voting yes and 14% voting no. The majority of the neighbourhood plan area is within the North East Derbyshire District Council. However, there are policies within the plan that are relevant to the National Park. It is considered that all of the Brampton Neighbourhood Plan policies are in general conformity with the Peak District National Park's planning policies as required by legislation, and that these policies enhance important local aspects as identified by the neighbourhood plan process. A neighbourhood plan comes into force as part of the relevant local planning authority's statutory development plan once it has been approved at referendum through Section 38 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act. As per National Gardens, the neighbourhood plan must then be made by the local planning authority within 8 weeks of the referendum. It is noted that North East Derbyshire District Council formally made the plan on the 30th November 2023. The Policy and Communities team therefore ask that the committee makes Brampton Neighbourhood Plan part of the statutory development plan for the Brampton neighbourhood area.
There are members. You have the recommendation in front of you. Lee, do you want to contribute to that?
I must admit I wasn't at the meeting. I was on holiday when the meeting happened. So
You're going to tell us how pleased you are that they've got their plan in place.
Yes.
Well, I'm happy to move this from the chair. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that's fine. And the last item on the agenda is the Planning Appeals Monthly Report. I think this is fairly straightforward. There's some goods and bads in that from the point of view. Ginny?
Yes, can I just make a point, Chairman, regarding the first item on there, which is the seasonal campsite. It's very disappointing that the authority's representation regarding this was submitted to the inspectorate without coming first to either the planning committee or at the very least chair and vice chair. The parish council registered strong objections, and this in itself would have meant that it would normally have come to the planning committee if that was the normal process and not bypassed by the applicant actually taking it straight to appeal. So this is obviously gone now, but I would just like to make that point for future.
Yes, I realise the point you're making, that if the parish council has objected, we ought not to be supporting an application at appeal in these circumstances without members hearing what the issue is. I think that's...
And that is what we have done.
That's a reasonable point, actually. It's something you could look at for the future. It's unfortunate that. Yeah, okay. I move that the report be noted. Seconded. All those in favour? Right. Thank you very much. We're finishing at 1:33 or something of that sort. May I wish you all a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year? Or